Jennifer walked on, brushing away her tears. The pouring rain helped hide the pain across her cheeks. Life seemed to be over, cut short forever after hearing those words. That was less than an hour ago. On the second floor of his house. "I'm not marrying you. Go get an abortion," her lover said in a cold tone in response to her confession. Jennifer was not confused. "You said we were serious. We're dating." "Yes, dating to have a good time, Jennifer. What were you thinking? Why did you believe I was going to propose to you to be my wife when you asked that? You always take a guy's word at face value," he asked with a chuckle. "What am I supposed to do now?" "Do you think I should have an abortion?" The girl broke off, looking into the insolent eyes of her beloved John. "I told you to get rid of it. I'll give you the money. Do you realize that after the abortion I may never have children at all? What are you reproaching me with? Children are the responsibility of the one who gives birth to them. I don't owe you anything." Jennifer looked in horror at the guy she had fallen in love with and said through her tears, "I don't recognize you, John. What are you talking about? It was your offer to go to the drugstore to get pills. What does that have to do with me? I'm the one who has to give birth, not you. Why did you think for me instead of letting me make the decision myself?" That made her cry even harder. John pulled out his smartphone, not reacting to her tears, and started to look at something. After a minute, she heard a notification on her phone. "I transferred the money. You can go to the best clinic. You've had enough. You'll still have some left over," he said idly. "Don't you feel sorry for this child at all? It's a human being, John. A tiny human being. It's an embryo now." "Don't be dramatic." Jennifer couldn't believe it when she heard those words. Her heart froze. Her gaze became glassy. She lifted her eyes and looked at her face, realizing she was looking for a conscience from an unconscious, and said, "I wish your mother had done the same to you," wiping away her tears. The last words came out of her like a lump of stinking mud. Jennifer rushed away from John's house, from the shards of her broken heart left in his house. Outside, the fall rain was pouring down. There was no umbrella, but that was even better. No one would guess she was crying. The memory took her back to their acquaintance in the hot summer. A friend had invited her to a picnic where Jennifer had met John, a tall, slender guy. He looked at her with his small black eyes. His gaze gave her uncomfortable goosebumps all over her body. There was no way she would have tried to get close to him, but her friend had noticed that he was interested and had persuaded her to talk to him. John turned out to be extremely kind and polite. After the picnic, he called a personal driver to take Jennifer home. Only then did she learn that he was the son of the owners of the local knitting factory. Everyone in town knew about this enterprise. They paid good wages, paid generous overtime, and gave extra days off. It was the dream of every third citizen to get a job with this company. Even the janitors were paid twice as much as anywhere else. Jennifer's mom worked in this factory, as did many others. Jennifer froze at the intercom, hesitant to pick up the key. Her mother knew about her relationship with John and had disapproved of it from the beginning, warning, "The son of the rich is a go-getter. He can't be trusted." With a trembling hand, Jennifer opened the entryway door, pressed the elevator call button. Her pulse pounded in her ears. Her mother wouldn't be happy about the surprise. But there was nowhere to go. Father was dead. Grandmother might have a heart attack from such news. In despair, Jennifer burst into tears again. The elevator doors opened. In the elevator mirror, she saw her crying face and smeared mascara. She had forgotten all about makeup. Taking tissues from her purse, Jennifer quickly cleaned herself up. Otherwise, her mother would ask what was wrong. The two-room apartment smelled pleasantly of borscht. "Jennifer, hi. You're home early today, aren't you?" "I parked. Mom's in the kitchen. We broke up. I heard my mother throw a spoon into the plate over the noise in the hallway." "What happened? Tell me," Sharon asked in a caring voice, looking at her daughter. Unable to hold back any longer, Jennifer burst into tears. "The bastard," her mother shouted after hearing her. "He's not going to get away with this." No. Jennifer looked sadly at the flaring mom and said, "What can he do? You can't make him fall in love and get married. You can make him take care of the baby, though. All you have to do is sue for paternity, and that bastard will be in trouble." "So the baby hasn't been born yet," said the mother. "It will be. And that bastard isn't going anywhere. I'm not going to let you, a first-year student, be left with a baby in your arms. I'll go to his parents tomorrow and tell them everything. Let them influence their son," the mother said, and suggested, "Let's go to the kitchen, eat." "Did you register with the gynecologist?" "Yes, good for you." Mom hugged her and kissed her on the cheek. "Don't worry. I won't let you get hurt, no matter what it costs me. I'm going to look for a job tomorrow so I can get some maternity pay. You can hardly support me and the baby on your own. That's my gold. Find one if you can. Without education, without experience, It's a bit difficult, but we could really use an extra penny. Her mother couldn't sleep at night, imagining going to talk to John's family tomorrow. It would be difficult for her, a simple cleaning woman, to threaten these powerful and wealthy people, who were also her superiors. Will they listen to her? What will she live on if she is fired for this conversation? She has a stash, of course, but it won't last long. In the morning, she woke up earlier than usual and peeked into Jennifer's room. Her daughter was still asleep, filled with determination to protect her and her future grandson or granddaughter. She put on her business suit, put on her makeup, styled her short hair, and, after eating a light breakfast, went to the bus stop. Her intuition told her that rotten apples grew on a sick apple tree. It was unlikely that John's parents, who had known about their son's pranks for years, would be better in character than he was. After all, the city has long been rumored how one of the girls of this infantile guy went to abortion, until he earned himself because of it infertility. The boss's office was on the second floor of the textile factory. The last time she saw John's father was on March 8th, when he handed the female employees envelopes with gift certificates to a cosmetics and perfumes man. His wife Catherine was the plant's chief accountant. Rumor had it that she was the reason the company was thriving. She decided that a woman's understanding of feelings would be easier than a man's. She addressed Catherine. "Catherine, good morning. My name is Sharon. I would like to speak with you regarding your son," she said as she got into the right office. "Good morning, Sharon. Have a seat." Is he distracting the young female employees from their work again? No. The question is more personal. "May I speak to you privately, mother to mother?" Hearing these words, the boss asked the other accountant to leave the office for half an hour. "This is about your son and my daughter, Jennifer. She is pregnant with his child. Your son refuses to be a father and is demanding to get rid of the child. Has he offered her an abortion?" "Yes, in that case. What's the problem?" "My daughter won't do that. It is a serious psychological and physiological trauma for a woman to give birth and raise a child alone. Would it be less traumatic for her? From your perspective, my son will not take such a step as fatherhood. He has studies, a great future. After all, marriage to your daughter is definitely not in our plans. You're willing to kill your grandson or granddaughter for your premgo. Is human life worth nothing to you at all? I've already gone for an abortion and, as you can see, I even gave birth to a son. Yes, it was a hard thing to go through, but at least next time your daughter will think with her head. You know what?" Sharon was indignant. "If you don't want to hold your son accountable, he'll be held accountable by the courts by us." There was a knock on the office door. "I'm busy," the supervisor called out, not even opening for her favorite son. "Mom, it's me," the young man uttered, looking inside and seeing his mother. "Hello, Sharon." "Come in," his mother told him. "Listen, what are you being threatened with?" John's face turned cold in an instant. "I was expecting money. What's her problem?" "The idea of killing her own child doesn't just bother her. It bothers me too. I'm surprised you're taking it so lightly. The life of a human being born means nothing to you. As you wish, it's your right, but you'll raise it yourself. I wasn't planning on starting a family." I can imagine the headlines in the papers. "A millionaire's son marries a cleaning lady's daughter." That would be a laugh. "You don't have to get married. We'll prove your paternity in court, and then the headlines will be even more interesting." Mother and son laughed. John said, "Suppose we do, what then?" Chilled support. "So I'm a student. What would a quarter of my scholarship be? Less than $1. But the father's going to spend a lot of money on the DNA test. You won't always be a student. Like your mom said, you got a big future. Yeah, it's not going to be for you and your daughter. No future." John smirked victoriously, realizing that he wouldn't forgive the bastard who'd done that to her daughter. Sharon remembered the only person who could help. In a situation like this, for years she had lied that he'd been a paratrooper and died. For years she hadn't spoken to him, or even wished him happy holidays. But he was true to his word all these years, provided for her and her daughter so that they did not need anything. And inside the envelopes with money always wrote, "Remember you and Annie at any time you can turn to me walking by." John smirked against Sharon's lips. The woman looked into his eyes and said, "Smile while you can. It's not all for naught. Lent will come." Annie's father used to run a criminal gang, and most of the town and even the surrounding villages had heard about his dealings. The gangsters took away businesses, houses, and apartments they liked. As the ringleader, Stephen did not shy away from anything. He used threats, torture, blackmail, sometimes took some families to the forest and left them there. Even the police could not defend themselves against his people. Everyone who tried to catch the gang could not be found. Within a week, the town was living in fear, until Stephen fell in love. It was just before Easter. Sharon came out of church with her mom. That's where Stephen spotted her. When he found out that the girl was religious and decent, He drove up in his BM to meet her. Sharon turned him down. "Are you crazy?" her friend shrieked when she heard what had happened. "That thug could bury all your loved ones alive just to get your consent. Don't mess with him." "He's dangerous. If I don't want to meet someone, I won't," reply to stubborn Sharon. "Fool. This gang won't play games with you." "Did you hear what they're doing?" A frightened Sharon heeded her friend's advice. When Stephen drove up a second time, she agreed to have dinner with him for their first date. The gang leader chose the most upscale restaurant in New York City. I didn't make a pass at her. After dinner, he gave Sharon a large bouquet of white roses and drove her home. "Good God. Did you really get mixed up with that bastard?" her mother asked anxiously when she saw whose car her daughter had emerged from with a bouquet. "I mean, the whole town is afraid of him. Why did you get mixed up with him?" "That's just it. He's a very dangerous man. And denying him an introduction was a bad idea, too. I don't want to lose you or get in big trouble." "Did he hit on you?" "No. Oddly enough. Behaved decently for a thug." Rumors of Stephen and Sharon's relationship spread around town within a week. Parishioners at the church she went to, cloaked in the words of the Apostle Paul, chattered. What could righteousness have in common with lawlessness? The man provided her with a car and security. "Do you realize that your lover is risking his life to meet him?" When the gang leader showed up unexpectedly with Sharon at a morning service a month and a half later, both the congregation and the priest were frightened. From that moment on, however, Stephen's rampage was never heard of again in town. He began to develop 2 days from their business and threatened no one else. But retiring for the bandit does not mean that he will be left alone. The first time Sharon was kidnapped was right on her wedding day to Stephen. The groom's enemies snatched the bride from the house in a white dress, asking her mother to tell her future son-in-law that Sharon will be returned in pieces if he does not return the 3-bedroom apartment once taken by his gang. Stephen located the kidnappers and fed each one lead. "But couldn't you just give people their property back?" screamed at him by his rescued fiancée. "Why kill them? Because they wouldn't stop at one apartment. Believe me, darling, human greed has no limits. In this case, I'll always be kidnapped. You're okay with that?" People don't always understand the language of power quickly, but in a year, it'll be quiet. I'll provide you with heavy security for that time. After hearing those words, Sharon called off the wedding. Then Stephen himself kidnapped her and took her to a country cottage. He said that she would not return home until she changed her mind, realizing that it was better not to joke with him. Sharon agreed. 3 months into the marriage, she became pregnant. When the unborn Annie was 5 weeks old, there was another assassination attempt on her parents. After surviving the threat of miscarriage, Sharon fled from Stephen to another city, deciding that it would be safer. He provided his spouse with everything she needed through his men. Stephen realized that the family was no more when his wife, returning with a child in her arms, through the court demanded a divorce. Stephen had not expected such a turn. He had chosen a religious bride for a reason. It was known among the thugs that such a girl would be faithful, and by God's law could not divorce. However, other thugs stole future wives from Protestant churches. Apparently, unlike Stephen, they knew that the Orthodox were the most wayward. It seems that the priest who refused to marry the gang leader, even at gunpoint, understood something. Her mother told Sharon that the gang leader had bribed the judge or blackmailed him into rejecting her demands, but the spouse wouldn't do it. After the divorce proceedings, the ex approached her, gave her the keys to a 2-room apartment and said, "This is for Annie and you. I don't need your handouts. Sharon, this is not the time to show your pride. Please accept it. There is a crisis in the country. I don't want you, our daughter, and your mom living in a 1-bedroom. You can't provide a nanny on your own, understand?" Realizing that Stephen was right, Sharon took the keys. "Stephen, promise me something." "Sharon, what do you want?" "Stephen, promise me you won't show up in our daughter's life. Disappear as if you never existed. There's no way she's going to get her life together if everyone around her knows about her gangster daddy." "Sharon, yeah, the whole town knows I was your wife. How are you going to hide it? When I was pregnant and gave birth, we didn't live together. I'll say I got pregnant in another town by a trooper. It's safer for everyone. None of the thugs will infringe on the baby and will hopefully be left alone. Stephen, but I will still help you. The mother of my child shouldn't need anything. And if anything happens, remember, you can always turn to me." Nearly 19 years have passed since Stephen said those words. In all that time, Sharon had never once asked him for help, dealing with all the difficulties on her own. Only now, "Sharon, but you've left her no choice. The ex-spouse had accomplished a lot in the intervening years, standing in front of the 9-story building of his business center. Sharon was about to enter when a familiar heavy voice shouted behind her. Looking around, she saw a black Hummer in the parking lot. The driver's door opened and a tall, gray-haired man with bushy black eyebrows approached her. His dusky gaze was blood-chillingly terrifying. She tried to say hello to Stephen, but the words stuck in her throat. "Stephen, are you here by chance or on business?" Coming to her senses, Sharon replied, "Business. I want to ask for help for Annie. She's in trouble." Asking what was wrong, Stephen listened to her in silence and didn't seem to pay attention to Sharon's pale face. "Stephen, I'll try to help, but I can't promise anything. My wife will make a scene if she finds out I'm helping you. She doesn't know I have a daughter." "Sharon, I understand, and I'd be happy if you could come up with something. There's no one else we can count on." "Stephen, go home, don't worry. I won't let anyone treat my daughter like that." In the morning, he woke up before his alarm clock. The clock read 4. As the door to his room swung open and 2 men with guns, dressed as a SWAT team, ordered him to lie on the floor. "Jennifer," one of them asked. The boy nodded. Cuffing him, the strangers dragged him into the courtyard. "What am I being charged with?" he asked, finding himself on the lawn next to a crying mom. "You abused the daughter of a very powerful man. Now he wants to do the same to you." "John, is it true?" the mother asked in horror. "No, I have no idea who we're talking about. You have me confused with someone else." Shush. "There's no mistake, John. Just did the deed and into the bushes," stretched a man's voice. John started going through his head of all the girls he had rejected, trying to figure out which one might have such intimidating familiarity. Who had he raped? Who had he dumped? Annie Roberts. Hearing that name was the last thing he expected to hear. "Annie doesn't have a father." "He's dead," John said with bewilderment. "You're the one who's going to die now, and your mom's going to watch. She went along with killing her grandson, didn't she? So she'll survive the death of her irresponsible son?" "No, please, no," the mother screamed. Someone hit him, and he blacked out. He woke up in a windowless white room. The light of a lone bulb reflected off the light surfaces, blinding his eyes. Everything around him was white: a small toilet, a sink doors, bedding, and a metal bed. There was no watch on his hand. "What time is it?" John asked loudly. No one answered. Instead, a slit opened at the bottom of the door and a metal tray of food appeared. "How long have I been asleep?" asked the boy again. Still no one answered him. There were no books, no newspapers, nothing around. Out of boredom, John began to walk around the room, counting his steps or minutes. He decided that the lights would be turned off for the night and waited for that moment. A long time passed. He felt sleepy, but the light bulb was still on. It was very difficult to sleep for this reason. He had to lie face down on his pillow. The food was the same all the time, and it was hard to tell what time it was. No one answered questions. John listened, but not a sound came from outside. Seeing a camera in the corner of the ceiling, he tried to feign an epileptic fit, but no one came in to check on him. Attempts to annoy the guards with his singing didn't work either. Feeling himself starting to go crazy, he wailed, "Tell me what you want, Mary Annie. I'll do anything. Just let me out of here again." There was no reply. Realizing that time flies faster in a dream, John went to sleep. He dreamed of the same white room. Opening his eyes, he saw a copy of himself in the corner wearing the same clothes with the same haircut. "This can't be," John said, not believing his eyes. Ick and his copy nodded in response. From that moment on, he lost touch with reality. 4 days after the kidnapping, he was dumped unconscious outside the house, where he was discovered by a new security guard hired by his father after an armed attack on the house. Seeing that the boy was not himself, Daniel Smith brought him to a psychiatric hospital. The next day, his dad came to visit him. Upon seeing his father, John asked, "Where's Mom?" "She hasn't been found yet," Dad replied. "What do you mean they haven't found her? With your connections, you could even get her out of a space station," John said in a cold tone without raising his voice. "I know nothing will happen to her. Nothing. Thugs broke into our house, beat us up, dragged us outside in the middle of the night, and took us away. And you say nothing's going to happen. Show me the bruises from your beatings." "Were you serious?" John asked resentfully. "Absolutely. If you've been beaten, show me." The boy mewed. "That's just it. You were just dragged out. No one hit you. You don't have to exaggerate, wanting to see a smidgen of guilt on your father's stone face." John zeroed in on him with accusations. "Where were you when we were being let out like cattle, drinking with your friends again? I suppose. Why didn't you save us with your connections?" Because there are bigger sharks in town than me. And because I don't intend to be responsible for your and Mom's decision made without me. You crossed Stephen Roberts. Do you even know who that is? Hearing the name, John turned pale. He was the one who had shot Stephen Roberts in the legs when he refused to give him a house. That's right. I thought Stephen had no children of his own, just a stepdaughter. Where did he get a daughter from? Certainly not from his second wife. Second, he wondered. Then who was the first? Sharon, Annie's mom. The one you wanted? Didn't you wonder who you were sleeping with? Yeah, everyone said she didn't have a father, and she said so. They say they milk cows. The son began to justify himself. I apologized to her, and the sooner the better. When Annie saw John in front of the university with a huge bouquet of roses, she was surprised and at first thought that the flowers were meant for another girl. Annie's ex called out as he watched her walk away. Wait, what do you want? How mean are we? I just wanted to apologize. I'm sorry. I was out of line. I didn't know what I wanted and I got scared. Let's be together, get married? Like you want? As soon as his silhouette disappeared behind the door, she came out with a bouquet of roses and said to the driver, Fyodor, tell your boss that I went home and see him and my guests I do not wish to. I understand you. The driver nodded with a smile. Have a good day. Goodbye. The entrance of the apartment building was next to the building where the store was. Running home, she shouted from the threshold, Are you home? Yes, hello, came a voice from the room, reading. Fill the vase with water, please. John gave me a big bouquet of roses. Mom looked out into the hallway and saw the bouquet and took the biggest vase in the house. Is he trying to pay you off? She asked her daughter. He apologized. He was on his knees, begging for forgiveness. He said my father's friends stole his mom. So they paid. The bastards, the mother said. Fetching water, did you ask someone to punish them? Sort of. I hope you haven't forgiven that rascal. Not yet. I don't see any love in his words. It's all about calculation. That's right. You don't need a husband like that, let alone a father for your child. But I chose him myself. Mom, you're young. You don't know much about men. No wonder she was wrong, she said, taking the bouquet. The intercom rang. Who is it all of a sudden? The woman wondered. John came with me. Wants to know where his mom is. We don't know. You don't know where she is either? No. I don't give a shit about that bitch after what she did. She can die under offense. Can you check with your friends and see what they did to her? I feel sorry for him. The ringing stopped on the phone. A text from John came through on it. Mom's home. Pick up the cake. Thank you so much. How is she? John asked the doctor. Before going in to see her mother is better, but still not well. Repeats the same thing several times. Doesn't sleep well, screams at night. She was kept in a small white room in confinement. Like me, but much longer. I'm terribly sorry for your grief. I hope the perpetrators are caught and punished. We hope so, too, John lied. When he came in, Mom was sitting on her bed, mumbling to herself. Hi, the son said with embarrassment in his voice. They should pay for this, the mother said angrily, looking him straight in the eye. Who are the Robertses? Make them suffer for what they did to us. Jennifer replied and cried. John rushed to comfort his mother. She was shaking and her sobs were getting louder by the minute. Finally, she stopped and asked, Johnny, is it really you? Really, Mom? I don't think so. Her friend supported her son. Do you want to pinch for us? The mother pinched her son's ear and said, I'm happy. I thought you were dead, that you were killed. Son, I can't bear to lose you like that. It's all right, Mom. I'm here for you. He hugged her. I hope it lasts. Avenge me. Avenge me. That lousy cleaning lady should know who she's messing with. Her husband was Stephen Roberts. Did you know that? Mom was surprised. No, I thought they were just namesakes. She was his first wife. Then be careful, son. Roberts isn't someone to be trifled with, Zanaya, except she won't appreciate what her husband did. Yeah, I was at the same party as her son. I don't think he'll be happy to have a half-sister. Mom looked him in the eye and said, Tell him everything. It's unlikely that Peter wants to lose his inheritance. Meeting Stephen's stepson wasn't difficult for John. He knew where the guy spent his weekends. Meeting him at a club and having a drink with him, he as if casually uttered, Why didn't you tell me you had a sister? I didn't get it. A drunken Peter wondered, what sister? Annie Roberts is my ex-girlfriend, direct heiress to father. Yeah, he doesn't have kids. I'm confused. Check his passport. And if you don't believe me, why else would he just help out some cleaning lady's daughter? How did you know they were related? I hope you didn't take my word for it, he grinned. When she said she was his daughter, I asked for her birth certificate. Little who would want to pretend to be the child of a famous businessman to hook up with me, and she really is his daughter. Yeah, I'm telling you, check it out. Peter took the car and drove with him from the club to his house. The boys went up the spiral staircase to the second floor. Once in his acquaintance's room, John asked, "Do you mean he keeps his passport with you?" No, of course not. But I must have scans of all the pages. Once his computer crashed in his office, and Steve was making copies from the documents. That said, Peter pressed a button on the system unit, opening the right folder. The guy quickly found the necessary files and, having checked them, was stunned. On one of the pages of the passport, as a child was indeed written down as a child unknown to him, Robert's Annie. "We have to show Mom, she'll kill him," Peter said. John held back his smile as best he could. Now they're fed up with her, Mom will be finished. "Let's go get drunk," the acquaintance suggested with sadness in his voice. "It's such a shame. Do not even imagine why I hope that after his death, all this business empire will go to me and my mother. But in the end, no way. His daughter can have half of it. Mother didn't want to marry him." John decided to ignore people's opinion of him and focus only on his wealth. Love comes and goes, but money is always wanted. Hearing these words, John was struck with the idea of taking Stephen out with his own hands. Thus he killed two birds with one stone. The news that the big businessman Roberts crashed his car into his own garage door and a neighbor's brick fence, and is now in the hospital, went around all the newspapers and social networks. The former candidate's enemies rejoiced. Annie's mom began to worry. Sharon and Peter took anxious calls from loved ones. John drove to his mother's house triumphantly. She's dramatically on the mend today," the psychiatrist told him, smiling all day. "Good appetite." Stopped talking to herself. Hearing this, he realized his mother already knew about his gift. As soon as the guy walked in, his mother immediately threw herself around his neck. "That pervert is in a coma." "Did you hear?" Jennifer asked with a happy spark in her eyes. "I know." "Guess who accomplished that?" With an enigmatic smile, her son whispered to her. "You," wondered the mother. He nodded. "But how?" It was all his stepson, wasn't it? He got very upset when he found out about the heiress and did something to his car, smiling broadly. His mother kissed him and said, "You are the best. My hope and support, my protector. Not like your father." The words made the boy glow. "Glad to try, Mom. All for you. You know that." Leaving the hospital, John called Peter. "So, celebrating, of course. You're still asking. How did Mom blame herself at first? Thought she was the reason everything happened. I told her about Stephen's daughter, showed her passport details. Mom gave him a hard time about it. He drove out of the house in a tizzy. She thought it was the argument that made him lose control of the car. Only the two of us know it was about something else." John stretched out. "Should we sit in the restaurant or the bar? It's hard to talk in a bar." "Let's go to the restaurant, and thanks for the idea." Of course, it would be better if a scumbag like that died right away. But a coma isn't bad either, agreed. "Let's continue at the restaurant. I'll stop by somewhere else on the way in an hour." "Okay," the man agreed, and they said their goodbyes. John had one last burden to remove, the pregnant Annie. Driving up to the university, he called his ex. "Are you coming soon? I'm waiting for you here, right on time, as always." "I'm on my way out." When he saw Annie, he glowed, anticipating knocking the ground out from under her feet. "What are you so happy about?" she asked. "There's a reason for it, Annie. You see, I'm free again now. Have you been seeing someone?" "No, I had to marry someone who knocked me up." "Did you succeed besides me?" John laughed. "You're impenetrably stupid if you don't realize this is about you. You see, your protector, your daddy, is now in the hospital and may be asleep forever. But what are we going to do, ladies? Who else are you going to ask to scare? My father has been dead for a long time." "What do you mean? Haven't you looked at your birth certificate? Look, you might find out that your dad wasn't a paratrooper, but a gangster, for example." "I didn't have to look for the certificate. My mom confessed everything herself and apologized. So I'm the daughter of the head of the biggest business in town." "Yes, but today he had an accident. The brakes failed. It's been on the news all day. Have you heard?" John said, "I'm glad. Come on, you rascal. We'll want to visit your father." Annie nodded. "Go, I don't mind. You won't keep me company. I'm afraid I'll see his current spouse there. He'll ask me who I am." On the way to the hospital, Annie thought about what she would say to his family if she met them in the room. She pictured her father's grief-stricken new wife, her stepson's mother comforting him. However, there was no one near her father. With a sigh of relief, Annie examined his formidable facial features and decided to ask her mother at home about the story of their acquaintance. That night, Annie and her mother lay awake for a long time discussing Stephen over tea. "Do you think he'll make it?" she asked her mother. "Bullets didn't take him. What's an accident to him? He doesn't burn in fire or drown in water." Jennifer visited Stephen in the hospital every 3 days. She asked the doctors if there was any improvement. "He's been twiddling his thumb recently," a nurse said. In a coma, however, that didn't tell her much, except that the finger wasn't broken. In that case, what would be the sign of coming out of the coma? When he starts to regain consciousness, open his eyes, respond to sounds briefly, move gradually, cough, the nurse explained. Coughing will be a very good sign. It will mean that breathing has been restored. You visit him often. In these 2 weeks, no one has come but you. Annie wasn't surprised, figuring that perhaps Stephen's family had a lot of business to attend to right now. "Oh, he works hard," I guess the nurse said. "Why don't make me laugh? It's just that no one needs him but you." "What makes you think that?" Jennifer asked with a smile. "I've worked here for many years, and I see if a loved one is in trouble, you forget everything. People would come straight from an airplane flying across the continent, knocking on the door at night, screaming at the windows, and his wife, even though she lives in this town, didn't even find the time to come." The nurse's words made Annie think. She wanted to see a picture of her father's new wife. In a search, she found his wife's social media accounts and several posts by a grief-stricken Dana, who wrote how hard it was to see her husband in the hospital, not knowing if he would survive or not. People sympathized with her, not imagining her hypocrisy. A month and a half later, doctors suggested to Dana that Stephen be taken off life support. Upon learning of this, Annie wrote to her stepmother asking her to withhold consent. In response, Dana chimed in, "Why prolong his agony? Once he wakes up, he could be an invalid for the rest of his days. Believe me, Stephen will not forgive himself for being a burden. If that happens, I'm prepared to look after him." "For what? You're hoping to get a piece of his business?" "No, you can handle his companies just fine without me." "I don't know anything about that. You're hoping to get the assets." "I don't mean to offend you, Annie, but don't you realize that I care about him because he's my husband?" Annie laughed. "You don't know him or you wouldn't be acting like this. Stephen is a terrible man. There's a special place in hell for people like him. And nobody's a saint," Dana sighed. "Fine, sit with that half-corpse, I won't get in the way." Annie was taken aback. "What are you talking about? That's your husband." "Annie. According to the doctors, he's already got his feet in the grave. I don't get attached to someone you didn't even know." Tears came to the girl's eyes. After finishing the conversation, she cried and clung to her father's hand. "You have chosen a horrible, simply monstrous wife. Please wake up or she'll kill you." Stephen's fingers stroked Annie's cheek. She lifted her head. He opened his eyes. "Alive, alive. I'm so glad," she cried out. Her father smiled weakly. He seemed to recognize her. Recovering was hard, but Stephen didn't give up. He was motivated to mend his relationship with Sharon and help raise his granddaughter. Even though he lost the business, the property remained with him, thanks to a contract he had drawn up in case of illness. The contract stipulated that when death was threatened, Dan's wife became the owner of the business, but since she was unable to manage, the management passed to her son Peter. Stephen's satisfied stepson took over the business and tried to strip his stepfather of everything he had gained as much as possible. As soon as her husband came to his senses, Dana, who received everything, filed for divorce. Fortunately, such a turn of events the former gang leader expected. Gathering information about his daughter, he realized that Annie is very decent and put her on the list of directors, buying in her name a large stake in the company. When Peter wanted to change a major supplier, he was first confronted with the fact that he couldn't do it without his half-sister's vote. After receiving a threatening phone call from him, Jennifer turned to Stephen. The father told everything to his daughter and suggested how to proceed. Realizing that through her he could manage the firm, he offered Jennifer help on a permanent basis. Absolutely ignorant in this matter, the daughter naturally agreed. Not wanting to share the company with someone else, Peter threatened Jennifer with death. Stephen gave her the number of one of his friends. A few days later, the expensive car of the former stepson blew up right in the parking lot. The terrified Peter made no more threats. When Stephen started walking on his own, Annie's water broke. At the maternity hospital, it was discovered that the baby was in the wrong position. She had a C-section, the hardest day of her life, and when she woke up, when asked how the baby was, she heard that the baby was stillborn. The already trembling body had lost the will to live. To hear such a thing was a heavier burden for Annie than the word abortion. All her preparation for motherhood for many months All her plans and hopes collapsed in an instant. Those closest to her consoled her as best they could. Her mom spent hours listening to her on the phone while she was in the hospital. Her father used his cash reserves to hire the best therapist. University friends called and wrote to be supportive. John never showed up or sent a single message. However, upon learning of the tragedy, his parents offered their condolences. His mother was the first to offer a trip to the sea at their expense. 2 days later, she was joined by his father, who paid for the little girl's funeral and said he was ready to set up a memorial at his own expense. John's family came to the funeral in full force. Even Peter showed up to sympathize, which surprised both the former stepfather and Annie herself. When the child's father put a bouquet of small toy bears on the grave of the little girl, Annie had a tantrum. Taking her daughter under her arm, the mother led her to the car. "I don't understand what he wants here. He didn't pay the doctors for the delivery. He didn't try to support me in any way. Told me to get rid of the baby. And now he's hypocritically putting this bouquet with tears," Annie said. "I'm far more surprised by his parents. Why all of a sudden all this spending? His mom's condolences. I don't believe it at all after everything I've heard. You think he's trying to rise in the eyes of others because you're a future businesswoman now, not just a cleaning lady's daughter. It could very well be. I don't believe that snake has changed. Something's up to her." I could hardly stand the wake. She went home with her parents. The surroundings were awe-inspiring, mirrors draped in black cloth. She noticed that her room was empty. Gone were the crib she had bought, the pacifiers, the clothes she had given her baby girl. The newborn photo album lying on the shelf was also gone. Seeing a crucifix in the corner of the room, Annie closed the door and knelt down and asked, "Lord, I'm not a mom, and I don't know any prayers. Please give me strength." That night, she had an unusual and frightening dream. She had dug up a treasure which contained a gold locket. Opening it, she saw a picture of a girl who looked just like herself. Big blue eyes, locks of pure blonde hair, a birthmark on the left side of her neck. Feeling something native in this thing, she wanted to hold it to her chest. But suddenly a silhouette in black appeared and stole the locket. Annie wanted to run after him, but her feet became stuck in the ground. Attempts to get out failed, and she failed completely. Annie found herself in hell. Seeing her, one of the devils asked, "This is the treasure, here you go." At his flick, a diaper-wrapped doll appeared in the girl's hands. Seeing Annie, unable to bear the weight, fall to the ground with it, the devils laughed with the voices of her parents and snatched the doll away, whereupon she woke up. Annie decided not to date anyone else until she graduated from university. It was not easy to combine studying, running a business, and counseling with a psychotherapist, but she managed. With her parents' many activities and worries, the grief was forgotten a year later. Standing on her daughter's grave, Annie no longer cried. The next year, she devoted to reading books for running a successful business and attending seminars. Her father, as before, through her, offered sensible solutions for the company, which allowed Annie to gain more and more respect in the eyes of the other directors. Except Peter, the half-brother, increasingly hated her. He's proposing to cut the staff's pay because of his mistake. "Can you imagine, Dad?" She was indignant on the phone as she left the business center building. "He doesn't know how to take responsibility for his actions. If he does, the candy factory will close. Not all the people will work as before, getting paid $500 less. Peter doesn't think that's a significant amount of money for others. That's what I told him. Go to the factory and offer your initiative. People will appreciate it, but that's not what this is about." "Dad, who's George Smith?" "I think he's John Smith's son," Dad replied thoughtfully. "I don't remember that. He's a new face on the board of directors. He wasn't here before. I'm trying to figure out where he came from." "Then he must be his son. There's only 2 ways to get on the board of directors, either by vote or by the agreement we made when we merged our 9 businesses. You can trust him. John was my right-hand man back in the day. I can't say anything about his son. I don't know him personally. But I trust my dad about as much as I trust you and my mom." "Why? We hit it off. He invited me for coffee tomorrow. I hope he doesn't make a pass at me. If he gets naughty, let me know. I'll talk to John, and it won't happen again." After finishing her conversation with her father, Jennifer found herself in the parking lot outside the building. In front of her eyes, Peter was drinking from a tinfoil drink, leaning against his car. "Don't tell me you're also driving now," she turned to him reproachfully. "Where's your private driver?" "What's your business? It's his day off today. You can get into trouble yourself and make someone disabled if you drive drunk. But you, if you're so smart, you can teach me more life lessons." "I don't get enough of your interference in the company," he said, waking up. "Jesus, you're a mess. Who drives like that?" "Degenerates," George said, appearing over her shoulder. The new acquaintance quickly crossed the parking lot and sent Peter unconscious to the pavement with one precise blow. Jennifer covered her mouth with her hand in horror. Examining Peter's head, he said, "Get the first aid kit, please. I'll call an ambulance in the meantime." "Why did you hit him?" "To make sure he didn't go anywhere drunk." The girl brought a first aid kit from her car. Taking out sterile wipes, George explained to Annie. "When I was 5 years old, my mom was hit by a drunk driver in a crosswalk. There was no way to save her. I don't want anyone else to be without a loved one like I once was. I'm sorry, I realized the police might pick him up when it was too late." "It's all right. You did the drastic thing, but the right thing. Peter wouldn't have listened to what I said anyway." George and Annie got married a year after they met, and 2 years later they decided they wanted a child. And 3 years later, it turned out that the after effects of the C-section couldn't be cured, and Annie was infertile. Jennifer came home. In despair, waiting for George to return to tell him this unpleasant news, and realizing that every man wants to have an heir or heiress, Jennifer began to mentally prepare for divorce, taking out a bottle of red wine. Her husband caught her in the kitchen with a glass. There was an empty bottle on the bar and crumpled paper napkins lying on the bar, soaking up Annie's tears. "Jesus, what happened?" "Sunshine," Alan asked, running over to hug her. "George, what are you going to do if you find out I can't give you a baby? The treatment hasn't worked." With anxiety, he asked. "None at all," Jennifer cried even harder. "I'm infertile. I can never have children again." George kissed her on the top of her head and said, "In that case, I'll offer you a choice, a surrogate mom, a baby from an orphanage, or just face your old age alone with me. Whatever you want. I'll accept whatever you decide. I really will. I'll think about it. I'll tell you later what I've chosen." Annie couldn't sleep at night. She was calculating surrogate costs, risks, conditions. She paged through the database of children up for adoption. A 5-year-old blonde, sad-looking girl with big blue eyes caught her eye. Annie tried to remember where she might have seen her before. Opening the child's detailed profile, she looked at other photos. What she saw made her sit down against the computer chair, stunned. The girl had the exact same birthmark. They couldn't contain their amazement. Annie sent her mom a link to the profile, asking to see the pictures. Afterward, she woke her husband. Behind her back, Jennifer walked over to the monitor and, after reading the girl's name, asked, "Annie, are you sure you want the girl you took to be named like your late daughter?" "Look at her neck," ignoring her husband's question, Annie asked. Taking a closer look at the picture, he said, "Wow, that's quite a coincidence, and a spot like yours. It's not just a birthmark. It's like a mark on the women in our family. Me, my mom, my grandmother, my great-grandmother, we all have it. How did she get it?" "Do you think it's some relative of yours?" I already texted my mom a link to this girl's picture. I'm curious what she'll say. What she saw surprised Annie's mother. Calling her daughter in the morning, she said, "I showed this picture to your dad. He thinks it can't be just a coincidence. The girl's appearance, name, and age. He said he'd run it through the old channels." "Whose kid is this?" Profile says the mom gave her up. "Do you want to adopt her?" "Yeah. I feel something close, like I've seen it somewhere before. Remember that dream you told me about after Glinka died years ago? Isn't that the same girl in the locket picture?" Sharon thought for a few seconds, then uttered, "That's right. You, Jennifer, have you signed up for where yet? Foster parent school? They won't just let you adopt a girl. You have to go through training, get the paperwork together. You're right. We'll get on it today." After a week that wasn't consumed with thoughts of illness, constantly leafing through pictures of the girl, reading the information written in her profile over and over again, the training didn't come easily to Annie and John. The husband alerted the orphanage staff that Annie was the one he wanted to adopt and asked, "Are there any other families willing to take the girl in with them?" "No," the director replied. "Are you the first this year?" Annie is a difficult child. In what way she believes her real mom will come for her, says she dreams about her mother. And sometimes if she rejects you, don't be frightened. Do you know what a woman who dreams looks like? She has blue eyes, big lips, and russet waves of pure hair. From what we gather, Deborah Smith encountered the usual bustle of the airport. People hurried past, pushing each other with suitcases and carts. Flight announcements sounded incessantly. The crowd in the queues buzzed, getting lost in this maelstrom. She awkwardly made her way to the check-in counter, clutching worn bags of homemade food in her hands. In her 68 years, Deborah Smith had seen a lot, but this was the first time she had ever been on a flight. It was clear that a simple cleaning lady could only dream of going to the sky. You can't travel if you can barely make ends meet all your life. But there was no way to refuse. My only son invited me to visit. And it didn't matter that it was to fly to the other side of the country. It didn't matter that all the money would have to be spent. Just to see the wayward but dear boy. Deborah Smith hadn't realized how fast he'd grown up. Yesterday he seemed to be just crawling on the floor. And today he was a grown man, living in a big city. He has a job. What kind of job he has, he won't tell me. But it doesn't matter, as long as he didn't starve, as long as he lived in warmth. And she's baked some guests homemade pies, cutlets, and jam. 3 jars, all her favorites from childhood. I could just imagine how happy Jason would be, how he'd eat his mom's goodies with both cheeks. He looked so gaunt on his last visit. Men can't take care of themselves. Thoughts and memories tangled with one another. And Deborah Smith did not notice how she reached the coveted counter. Her hand had already reached to put the bags on the conveyor belt, but suddenly a young guard stopped her. "Citizen, would you be so kind as to show me what you have there?" Confused, Deborah Smith began to explain the gifts to her son. She tried to open the bag. With shaking hands, the guard pulled one of them open himself, unceremoniously dumping the contents out. "So what do we have here?" He examined each container meticulously. Some kind of pies, some kind of cutlets. And what is this jam? "Well, open it." The meticulous inspection seemed to take forever. The guard twirled each container in his hands, sniffing, asking Deborah Smith new questions. "Did you cook this yourself? Why is it in a glass container? Are you sure this is just jam?" At the back of the line, murmurs and sighs had already begun. Deborah Smith felt very uncomfortable. She kept apologizing and explaining, but the guard, as if he didn't hear, was stubborn and continued his exhortation. "According to the rules, the transportation of liquids and home-cooked food is restricted," he finally said as he unloaded the last can. "But so be it. As an exception, I'll allow it. But prepare more carefully next time." "Oh, thank you, honey," Deborah Smith exhaled with relief as she carefully stowed the gifts back. Her hands were visibly trembling with excitement. She got the lock on the bag and went on her way. But before she could take a couple steps, an angry voice came from behind her. "Hey, you old thing, hold up." Deborah Smith flinched and turned around. Standing right behind her was a man in an expensive suit, clearly accustomed to command and not recognizing rejection. His hands were covered with bracelets on his wrists, and one of them was wearing a massive watch, his boots shining as if they were lacquered. But most frightening of all were the eyes, prickly, full of contempt and arrogance. "My God, what have I done to him?" Deborah Smith thought confusedly and said calmly. "I'm sorry, I didn't do it on purpose. I was held up by security. I didn't want to disturb anyone. And I don't care whether it was on purpose or not." The man shouted. "Because of you, you old wreck, I might miss my plane. Have you looked at your watch? Do you think that if you have one foot in the grave, you can ruin the lives of others?" The insults came like lashes, scalding like lashes. Deborah Smith stood there, crumpling her bag in her hands and not knowing where to fall from shame. She was used to humiliation in her long life, but she had not seen such blatant, gratuitous rudeness in a long time. "All right, I'll forgive you for the first time," the rich man muttered, apparently tired of his own shouting. "But if you get in my face again, blame yourself," and proudly walked away, accompanied by the frightened looks of the queue. Deborah Smith remained standing as if petrified, confused, destroyed, broken. "Woman, are you all right? Are you feeling ill?" someone's voice asked sympathetically, bringing Deborah Smith out of her stupor. She looked up and saw a young girl in a stewardess uniform standing right in front of her. She looked at her with genuine concern and sympathy. Only now did Deborah Smith realize that she had tears running down her cheeks. Embarrassed, she wiped them away with her handkerchief and murmured, "It's all right. my daughter. It's all right. It's your own fault. I delayed the people with the queue." "Oh, come off it," exclaimed the girl eagerly. "It was he who had no right to treat you like that." A bore and a rude man. Deborah Smith only shook her head. But how could one explain to this pretty young thing what it was like to be humiliated at home and at work all one's life? And even here, in front of strangers, you have to endure abuse. You get used to it, try to accept it, and stop expecting anything else. The girl kept saying something. She seemed to assure him that she would try to talk to the rude man and call him to order. But Deborah Smith was no longer listening, only nodding and thanking crudely. All her thoughts were occupied with the forthcoming flight and the meeting with her son. She did not notice how she finally checked in, got to her seat on the airplane, sat down and buckled herself in, freezing like a little lump. Everything inside was shaking with fear and excitement. Lord help me. I wish I could fly. I wish I could see my son. Deborah Smith closed her eyes. Meanwhile, in the next row, a battle was raging. I will not tolerate inappropriately dressed passengers on my airplane. Get this old woman off this flight immediately. Deborah Smith recognized the voice instantly. The same angry rich man who had insulted her at the airport. Her heart dropped. That's it. It's over. They're going to drop me off. I'm not going anywhere, ran through her mind. But let me, man, she hasn't violated anything. She has a ticket. She checked and came the same ringing voice of the stewardess who had interceded for her earlier. Only now there was uncertainty in her tone. Of course she did. Who was she up against? I don't care. Take this bag of bones out. The rich man's voice oozed anger and triumph. It was obvious that he enjoyed the scandal. But Deborah Smith only froze, clutching the armrests of her chair with white fingers. No, not this. She has endured so much, waited so long for this day. Has it all been for nothing? Look, with all due respect, this woman has a right to fly, the stewardess babbled. But there was no longer the same confidence in her voice, only trepidation and a willingness to give up. Who is she to contradict a rich man? Deborah Smith thought bitterly. Kind, but not strong. Now she'll break, she'll give in. But the violent argument was suddenly interrupted by a confident male voice. Pardon me for interfering. This is the crew commander speaking. I will not allow you to disembark a female passenger without good reason. Fasten your seatbelts, we're taking off. The stewardess nimbly rushed to her seat. The rich man grumbled and cursed, but obeyed. The airplane hummed and took off. And Deborah Smith sat there, neither alive nor dead, repeating to herself as if she were running, Lord, help me. Holy Mother of God, you have interceded, and thought through her tears. What a terrible and shameful for this day. It would seem to have done nothing, and the heart as if torn to shreds. I wish I could fly sooner. I wish I could hug my son. All I can do for now is to endure, as I have endured all my life. Deborah Smith was shocked. She had never imagined that a normal flight to her son would turn out to be such a nightmare. Not only did she have to endure a humiliating search and insults from a rude rich man, but now there was a scandal on the airplane. And the stewardess during the flight tried to intercede for the unfortunate woman, several times approached the seat of the rich man, urging him to calm down and not to violate the rules of behavior. But the man would not listen to anything. Who are you to tell me what to do? He shouted in anger. I'm an airline passenger, by the way. Yes, I'll find a way to deal with you. Sue me. The stewardess was embarrassed by the pressure. She knew this angry guy could cause a lot of trouble, but she couldn't leave her grandmother in the lurch. She knew all too well what it was like to be humiliated and helpless. Please, let's settle this peacefully, calmly, she began. But the rich man only grew more agitated. Peacefully. I'll throw you out of your good job, you inept. You found yourself a protector. And one more word, he shrieked. You'll spend your life scrubbing latrines. Like that old poker. What a bore, thought the stewardess bitterly. She was literally shaking with indignation and resentment for her grandmother. But the fear of losing her favorite job was stronger. She had dreamed of becoming a stewardess since childhood. How her mother could spend hours listening to her stories about flying, distant countries, and interesting people. She imagined how she herself would soar above the clouds, giving passengers smiles and comfort. But one day there was grief. Her father, who worked in an aerospace agency, died during the testing of a new airplane. Everything collapsed overnight. Mother, after the tragedy, went into herself, began to drink, and soon went blind. And faded away in the incomplete 40 years. Young Ashley had a hard time, but there was always a favorite grandmother, strict, but infinitely kind and caring. Only thanks to her, Ashley learned, grew up, and achieved her dream. And now, seeing how an innocent old woman was being unfairly insulted, Ashley just couldn't stay away. But she had to keep herself within the guidelines for the sake of her favorite job and her parents' memory. "I'm sorry," she mumbled. The rich man, who'd done such a low thing, grinned triumphantly, pleased with his power. For the rest of the flight, he glared at her with derogatory glances, hurling insults through his teeth. Ashley just clenched her fists until they crunched, until they hurt. She'd find a way to teach the boor a lesson. They landed, luckily, without any problems. Deborah Smith got up from her seat and walked over to Ashley. "Thank you, sweetheart," she said, touching her arm. "You stood up for me. You were kind. God bless you." Tears came to Ashley's throat. She looked at her grandmother's wrinkled, kind face and saw in it the features of her late grandmother. Just as tough, tried and tested, but still loving people. "Don't mention it," Ashley murmured embarrassedly. "Anyone in my position would do that, but you can't let a man be hurt." Deborah Smith shook her head. "Oh dear, I wish everyone would think so. What's your name?" "Ashley." "Well, I gotta go, Ashley. My son's waiting." "He's been waiting." Deborah Smith smiled warmly at Ashley and hurried to the exit, dragging her small bags of goodies. The stewardess felt a sudden urge to protect this alien, but already as if she were her own grandmother. To talk to her, to ask her about her life, maybe even to help her get home. Somehow it seemed that they must meet again. The decision came lightning fast. Ashley had a quick word with the crew chief, asked for an hour off, and sprinted to catch up. Deborah Smith, she didn't know what she was going to say or how she was going to explain her impulse. She just felt she had to. I needed someone to support and encourage this lonely woman. Her grandmother was insulted. Just at least listened to her, hugged her, gave her tea. After all, everyone should have a guardian angel. Deborah Smith was already at the airport exit, looking around in confusion, clearly not sure where to go next. Deborah Smith, Ashley called out to her. Grandma turned around and was surprised to recognize her recent protector. "Ashley, I didn't expect that," she said with a smile. Ashley ran up to her and smiled radiantly. "You know what, Deborah Smith? I'm taking a break here. Why don't you let me walk you out, Jake, with your gifts? You'll get lost in the city." Grandma flapped her arms. "Oh, come on, honey. How could I? You've got work to do." But Ashley immediately grabbed her bags and took her grandmother under her arm. "How are you doing? The most important thing is to be a good person. You've been through so much today. Now it's my turn to take care of you." Deborah Smith only shook her head in admiration and unexpected joy. Rachel was already drawing her forward and chattering merrily about all sorts of things. Rachel and Deborah Smith walked leisurely through the streets of the unfamiliar town, occasionally checking the address on a piece of paper. Grandmother was a surprisingly talkative companion. As if sensing a kindred spirit, she eagerly shared her memories. "Rachel, dear, if you knew how much I love my little boy," she said with a sad smile. "He's a good, kind boy, but he's a little boy who can't sit still." She began to tell me that she had adopted Brendan when she was quite old. The lonely cleaning lady liked the orphan very much with his keen, intelligent eyes and simple-mindedness. And Deborah Smith herself very much wanted to find the meaning of life to warm, caress a tiny, lonely creature. All was well at first. Brendan grew up an intelligent, affectionate boy. The soul did not dote in the foster mom, and everything helped. Only in high school we somehow fell apart. Deborah Smith sighed, recalling those difficult years. He got mixed up with a bad crowd, started skipping school and coming home late. I coaxed him, I scolded him. I cried, but he didn't give a damn. I thought he'd come to his senses in the army, but he didn't. Brendan never settled down. He took odd jobs, got involved in some dubious ventures. After that, he was like a tumbleweed across the country. He would go fishing in the Far East or to construction in Siberia. And all to no avail. And now he's probably planning to go to the end of the world for some other adventure. Deborah Smith splashed her hands. I'm in my 70s. I have no health, and I have to take care of him as best I can, because I'm the only one he has. Rachel listened in silence to these sorrows and saw that, in spite of everything, the mother loved her stupid son. She loved him self-consciously, blindly, and was ready to give her last. And Rachel felt sorry for this kind, tortured woman to the point of tears. He wanted to do something to ease her lot, to comfort and support her. Soon they found themselves on the right street. They found the house where the rebellious Brendan and his partner lived. Deborah Smith timidly rang the doorbell, holding her breath. 1 minute, another, no one opened the door. Oh my, she muttered in surprise. He's not here. What a fidget, God forbid. At last there was some rustling and mumbling behind the door. Then the lock clicked. A young woman appeared on the doorstep, her hair disheveled and puffy, her gait swaying. What do you want? She squeezed out hoarsely, glaring vaguely at the strangers. She reeked of booze and smoke. Deborah Smith staggered backward, startled by what she saw, but quickly pulled herself together and babbled on, smiling harder. Hello, Sydney. Didn't you recognize me? I'm your mother. I thought I'd come and see you. Here, I brought some goodies. She held out a bag of food. But her daughter-in-law made no attempt to let the guests in. Mommy's here, she said angrily, and for nothing. Your sorrowful son is gone. He's gone to work, his precious. And I'm all alone here. And Sydney launched into an angry tirade, every now and then breaking into a shout. Brendan was spending all his money on himself, going out with women, and he didn't even give her a second thought. If she'd known what kind of asshole she'd run into, she never would have gotten involved with him. Deborah Smith stood there, clutching the unfortunate bag, and her sister-in-law, on the rampage, began to swing, trying to snatch the bag. A little more and definitely would have hit her mother-in-law in the face, not disdaining anything. But Rachel couldn't stand it, stepped forward, shielded her grandmother and glared angrily at the raging fury. You should be ashamed of yourselves. Deborah Smith has come to see you and has brought your young man some presents, and you've got your fists on her. How can you yell at an elderly person? She seemed to be jammed on him, and from the unexpected rebuff, she started with a new vigor, spitting saliva and profanity. She called the old woman names, calling her 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 names. Rachel also raised her voice in response, trying to calm her down, but to no avail. They argued on the doorstep for about 5 minutes, until Deborah became completely unhinged. Deborah Smith slowly pulled Rachel aside. Daughter, come on, let's get out of here. It's probably not the right time, she said. But she didn't give up, looking regretfully at her unhappy grandmother. There was no point in arguing further, only to upset Deborah Smith even more. She picked up the bags, put her arm around her shoulders, and led her away from the inhospitable house. Behind them, Jason was still cursing and cursing at the drunken Jason. But Rachel wasn't listening. Staring ahead, Sydney was frantically thinking of ways to help her new friend. She couldn't leave her alone in a strange city in such a depressed state, could she? Maybe convince her to go home, or try to find Brendan again, because she should try to talk to him. It was as if Deborah Smith had read her mind. Sighing heavily, she muttered, "All the same, we must go." Rachel replied, Come, Deborah Smith, let's go and find your Brendan. He won't get away from us. We'll have a heart-to-heart talk." Grandmother gratefully took Rachel's hand and pressed her lips together stubbornly. "Yes, Rachel, if this is the case, we have to go through with it. I'll go to work, I'll be patient, but I'll look him in the eye." And Deborah Smith strode resolutely forward, clutching her long-suffering bag of goodies. The stubborn grandmother, in spite of her fatigue and recent shocks, was moving toward her goal with remarkable steadfastness. Soon they were standing at the door of the firm where Deborah Smith had said that her troublemaking Brendan worked. Shyly, she opened the heavy door and peered inside. Rachel followed, looking around curiously. She was struck by the sparseness of the furnishings, bare walls, dusty windows, ancient furniture, and no one around but the emptiness of the corridor. Suddenly, footsteps and loud voices came from around the corner. Deborah Smith roused herself, prepared to rush toward her son. But the words of greeting froze on her lips. From around the corner, still muttering to himself, came the rich, scandalized man from that very flight. The same boorish and rude man who had abused the poor grandmother. Deborah Smith froze. The blood rushed to her face, and the rich man froze, half-stepping as he saw them. "Who do I see?" He grinned, his lips curling into a gloating smirk. "The old witch is here. What an insistent one." A young man in a cheap suit with frightened eyes peered over his shoulder. Deborah Smith gasped, clamping her hand over her mouth. "Brendan. Sonny." The boy jerked as if struck by a blow. A storm of emotions flashed across his face: surprise, confusion, fear, and even something akin to shame. But in the eyes of the rich man standing next to him, there was already unconcealed rage. "What kind of circus is this?" he shouted, glaring at the confused guard. "Why the hell did you bring your mother here, you idiot?" And this defender of the poor and the weak, he shifted his contemptuous gaze to the pale Rachel. Brendan staggered under his superior's threatening shout, pulling his head into his shoulders. I didn't call you. They came to you," he mumbled. "You're right, get out of here," the rich man shouted, sputtering. "Now, before I call the police." He turned on his heels and sped away, muttering angrily to himself. And poor Brendan stood in the middle of the hallway, staring at his mother. "You've got to be kidding me," he breathed out, shrugging nervously. "But who asked you to come here and fight with my boss?" "I didn't know." Deborah Smith began to babble, clutching her bag in her hands. Deborah Smith looked at Rachel with a startled look as Brendan lashed out at her. This was already too much. Brendan's temper flared. Fear for himself must have overpowered any vestiges of kinship. "You're always meddling where you're not wanted." "Are you going to get me fired from my job?" Deborah Smith froze, stunned by this sudden outburst, and her grandson cried more and more. "That's it. I've had enough. I don't want you here. You're nothing but trouble." He grabbed the bag from his mother and threw it in Rachel's direction. "What are you looking at? Take your grandmother and get the both of you out of here." Rachel picked up the bag. Deborah Smith stood stone still. Only her lips moved soundlessly and large tears rolled down her cheeks. Rachel's heart clenched with a pang of pity and anger. But it was useless to resent her. How to reach a man in whom fear had overpowered conscience and kindred feelings? Rachel only gently put her arm around Deborah Smith's shoulders and gently led her away from that horrible place. away from the stiffness of her own grandson. Home they flew in heavy silence. Oh, this is not good, Rachel thought for the umpteenth time, leaning back tiredly in the airplane seat. She smelled trouble and knew she would have to get involved in this ugly story again. After all, she just couldn't let it go. Deborah Smith had no right to. Rachel sighed and covered her eyes. There was still a long way to go before disaster struck, and in the meantime she could nap for an hour or two, gather her strength for new challenges. And there would be new trials. She had no doubt about that. The airplane hummed, taking her away from the city, where a part of her soul remained, to the place where her life was waiting for her. On the way home, Rachel found herself thinking hard. The story of Deborah Smith never left her mind, how unfair life could be to good people. Her own fate, however, seemed about to strike another blow. When she entered the apartment, Rachel stood on the threshold as if struck by thunder. In the living room, her fiancé John was sitting on the couch, cuddled up with some girl. They were selflessly kissing, not paying any attention to the world around them. Rachel's eyes darkened with confusion and resentment. In her own home in broad daylight. What kind of circus is this? She squeezed out, struggling to speak. John shuddered and bounced away from Deborah Smith's poopy-haired girlfriend. She wrinkled her nose in annoyance but didn't get up from the couch. She gave Rachel an indifferent glance and snickered. Oh, come on, your husband is not the first day on the ladies. Why throw tantrums? And you can see that Rachel, from the shock, cannot utter another word. The girl got up reluctantly and headed for the exit. She turned around at the door and gave a final glance. Claire. You don't think I should go to her, do you? You want to have some fun? Siao. And she was gone. And Rachel was still standing there like she'd swallowed her tongue. She couldn't get her head around what was happening. John quickly came to his senses, showing genuine remorse on his face, and rushed to his fiancée. Rachel, honey, I'm sorry. I'm out of my mind, for God's sake. I don't know what came over me. Never again, I give you my word. He tried to hug and kiss her, to justify himself. But Rachel's fiancé squeamishly pulled away. Pain and rage mixed with disgust boiled up inside. Get out. She gritted her teeth, barely able to keep from screaming. Now, before I break your face, and take your things so you won't be here anymore. John shrank back and tried to mumble something in his own defense, but when he saw the look of anger on Rachel's face, he realized it wouldn't work. It would be the worst thing in the world to mess with someone like that. He lowered his nose and began to throw his things into his bag. You're a fool, Rachel, he muttered, rummaging in the closet. Men go out, and it's okay. And you're so hysterical. So what if I was with a woman? Not in a brothel. She kept silent with her arms crossed over her chest, and dreamed only of one thing, that this nightmare would end quickly, that her eyes would never see this traitor and traitor again. Finally, the door slammed shut behind John. There was a ringing silence in the apartment. Emptiness. Rachel sank to the couch without strength. Tears choked in her throat, constricted with a cramp. So much for love to the grave. So much for loyalty. There was a reason she was so reluctant to get attached. Well, that's fine. Better to be alone than with someone like John. The next few days passed like a blur. Rachel mechanically ate, slept, went to work, and in her soul it was as if a black hole had formed, sucking in all thoughts and feelings. She forbade herself to think about Killian, chased away all memories of him. But it didn't make it any easier. At least no one at work asked her questions, seeing her gloomy, detached face. Colleagues sympathetically looked at her and nodded sympathetically, saying that she would change. The days dragged on in an endless, dreary succession. Rachel often thought back, wondering how Deborah Smith had settled in, whether she was all right. She wanted to call, but at the last moment stopped herself. She didn't want to reopen fresh wounds. to remind herself of the failed meeting with her son. And then Deborah Smith showed up. Rachel was just getting ready for her evening flight when the doorbell rang demandingly. Grandmother stood on the doorstep, sorrowful and trembling. "Oh my God, she's here. She's definitely on her last legs," Rachel thought to herself. "What happened?" she asked. Troubled Deborah Smith breathed out and almost fell, but was barely picked up by Rachel. When the water and sedative were finished, Deborah Smith, stammering and choking back tears, broke the terrible news. Brendan had been arrested, accused of some horrible crime, threatened with a huge sentence. And he's not guilty of anything. She knows that. That creep who was abusing us on the airplane. He set it all up," whispered Deborah Smith, wringing her wet handkerchief in her hands. "I know it, Rachel. Do you remember when he looked at us like a wolf? So he got his revenge, Herod. He wrote a statement, accused him of all the deadly sins, the one who didn't plow, and the cases inside. Of course, nothing surprising this scumbag could not just let the offense go. She quite believed he was the one who'd set the guy up for some dirty purpose. After all, he'd been nasty to his mom, and she'd hit him hard. But to rot in jail for nothing. Rachel's heart ached with sympathy and anger. "Don't cry, Deborah Smith," she said firmly. "We'll think of something. We'll get through this." Rachel had no idea what she could think of, but she knew for sure that she could not sit idly by. She had to act, to fight for the sake of the poor boy and his grief-stricken mother. After all, she had the main trump card on her hands, the opportunity to get close to Jeremy Winston. Since he was now a regular on her flights, she could get him to come clean, nail him to the wall, make him confess to his meanness. Luckily, the nearest flight was the one the damn rich guy usually took. Jeremy Winston was his name. Rachel was determined to take the bull by the horns this time. And of course, she was keeping Deborah Smith. Almost all the way to the airport, Rachel was preparing for the decisive conversation. She was going through all possible arguments in her head, choosing the right words, even composed a farewell speech in case the rich man would take revenge and she would be fired. But all plans went to shit. As soon as Rachel entered the VIP lounge and came face to face with Jeremy Winston, he was sitting in a chair, writing something in a notebook. "You're a fledgling," he said, glancing casually at Rachel. "Are you here to defend the poor again? There doesn't seem to be anyone else." The mocking tone and smirk of the man's sneer made Rachel instantly furious. What kind of politeness and arguments are there? This boor immediately signed his name to all of his art. The only thing to expect from him was the truth. "What do you mean, no one?" "Links." "With what?" Rachel blurted out with rage in her voice. "And Brendan Adams, Deborah Smith's son, who you framed, he's behind bars now because of you." Jeremy Winston froze before his fork reached his mouth. Then he laughed loudly and mockingly. "Tina, you're so hot. What's this got to do with me? You didn't hit your head, did you, beautiful?" His insolence made my eyes darken. No, that's just out of line. Such a cold-blooded, shameless lie. "You know very well," she whispered, clenching her fists. "It was you who filed the report against him. You wanted revenge to frame him." Jeremy Winston stopped laughing. He gave Rachel a scornful look and said coldly, "Honey, I think you're being paranoid. Why would I want to frame some security guard? I have nothing else to do. And it's none of your damn business. Go meet the passengers, if that's what you want." He looked away, squeamishly, indicating that the conversation was over. And Rachel felt as if something inside her had snapped. "Oh, is that it? You don't know anything?" she thought frantically, walking away. "Well, let's see how you'll sing when I've got you up against the wall. When I tell the whole world what a scoundrel you are." She had no idea how she was going to get the bastard, but she knew for sure that she would get what she wanted, no matter what. For now, it was necessary to gather her thoughts and urgently think of a plan of action. The first thing to do was to reassure Deborah Smith, to give her hope. And then there would be a way to put pressure on the rich man. "You've got the wrong girl, you bastard," Rachel repeated stubbornly to herself as she stepped into the airplane. Determination, anger gave her strength. She knew she would save Brendan. For the sake of her grandmother, for the sake of justice, and for the sake of her own belief that evil must be punished. Jeremy Winston would regret this. Of that she had no doubt. Deborah Smith was beside herself with grief and worry. Rachel did her best to comfort her, to inspire her with hope. How could a mother sit still when she knew that her own child was suffering innocently? They spent hours in the kitchen. Rachel made plans, thought of options. Grandmother once again told her how Brendan was a good boy, but only a careless one. And at the end of it, she was always in tears, bemoaning the fate of the wicked. "Why is he being punished like this, Rachel?" she sobbed, clutching her wet handkerchief in her hands. "He was a fool, a young man. He was foolish enough to get mixed up with that scoundrel. Is that what you should go to jail for?" Rachel realized that it was not Brendan's foolishness or his careless connections, but the meanness and vindictiveness of the man he had had the misfortune to cross. Or rather, not himself, but his mother, by her integrity and independence. "Well, nothing," Rachel thought gloomily, stroking her grandmother's shaking hands. "I'll get you yet. I'll remember everything, the abusive grandmother, and the frame-up with her son." But all plans for revenge were shattered when Deborah Smith began to feel ill one evening. She had suffered too many shocks. In the last few days, her aged heart had failed. Her body shuddering like a hunted bird, Rachel paced around the apartment, unable to find a place for her anxiety. The paramedics arrived surprisingly quickly, but as they placed the unconscious Deborah Smith on a stretcher, the faces of the team were glum and worried. "Let's get her to the emergency room," the doctor said, without looking at Rachel. "She's in serious condition. Are you a relative?" "IA," mumbled the dazed girl. Rachel was in a daze. She rushed from corner to corner to corner of the hospital corridor, trying time and again to enter the intensive care unit. They wouldn't let her in, of course. All she could do was wait and pray that Deborah Smith would pull through. By the end of the first 24 hours, spent almost without sleep or food, Rachel resembled her own shadow. Dark circles under her eyes. Her cheeks were sunken. There was a deep crease in her forehead. Even the most cheerful nurses looked at her with pity. It was then that the doctor who had attended Deborah Smith appeared in the hallway, a tall, stately man in his 40s with piercing gray eyes and a strong-willed chin. Rachel rushed toward him. "Well, how is she?" The doctor felt sorry for the girl. He cast her an attentive, studying look. "Condition is stable to serious. The crisis has passed. But tell me, are you definitely related to her?" Rachel was confused for a moment, not knowing how to explain. "Yes, it's just that she and I are very close. I should be close." The doctor frowned. It was obvious he was hesitating, not knowing if he could trust a girl he didn't know. But something in Rachel's face, in her haggard eyes, seemed to convince him. "All right," he sighed. "Let's go. Just briefly and very gently. She can't be worried." For the next few days, Rachel practically took up residence in the hospital. Day and night she sat by Deborah Smith's bedside and helped the nurses. She went home to sleep only for a couple of hours, and then rushed back, afraid to miss even the slightest change. The Dr. Jeremy Winston at first squinted disapprovingly, but, seeing the devotion of the girl, gradually began to talk to Rachel for a long time, to explain the features of treatment, and even consult on some issues. It turned out that they had a lot in common. Jeremy also lost his parents early and chose a profession to help people, and their characters were similar, purposeful, uncompromising. It came out, of course, that purely business communication turned into friendship, and romance was not far behind. Jeremy would bring Rachel coffee and homemade pies, a strange hobby for a doctor cooking. Then she would meet him after a night duty, tired and a little killed. And they would go for a walk in the nearest park. Deborah Smith was recovering slowly but surely, but she refused to go home. Rachel herself had grown fond of her grandmother. She realized that Deborah could not be alone in four walls. Now she would wither from longing for her son Brendan. So Deborah moved in with Rachel. But not for good. She rented out her apartment. She began to save money to help Brendan, then went to the detention center to her son, then to lawyers. Rachel could barely hold back her tears. True, while Deborah was ill, she was fired from the firm where she worked as a cleaner. It's understandable the office should be clean, but Grandma was still terribly upset. And here did not please, and there did not come out, bitterly whispered Sydney, dropping tears in a cup of tea. Why should I have such a share? Rachel, wherever you go, there's a wedge. Rachel hugged her and stroked her gray head, soothing her as best she could. It's okay, we'll get through this. Your health is the main thing, and the rest will come. And feverishly thought how to help. She couldn't do much on her paycheck alone, and Deborah had to carry Brendan's packages and pay the rent. Jeremy Winston was supportive, offering to find Deborah Smith a lighter job with a flexible schedule. Rachel put her arms around him and pressed herself against him, her throat constricted with the sensation. God, Jeremy, what would I do without you? You're a miracle, not a man. He grinned, kissing her gently on the top of her head. Rachel, what kind of miracle? Helping people close to you is normal, humanly speaking. And he looked at her in a way that made her chest squeeze with happiness and pain. Lord, did I really find mine, despite all the loss, the turmoil, despite all the injustice of the world? She wrapped her arms around his neck and reached up for a kiss. There were still many challenges ahead, but now, at this moment, Rachel believed that they could do it. Together they could make mountains for the truth, for love, and for the fragile hope that it was stronger. Rachel's mind was consumed with worrying about Deborah Smith. Most of her earnings now went to her for medicine, food, small needs. She didn't think much of herself, as long as grandmother didn't need anything. At first, Deborah Smith was reluctant, shy. Oh, come on, Rachel, don't. How am I supposed to pay it back? I'm not working now, she repeated. But Rachel wouldn't listen. What's the use, Deborah? She was genuinely surprised. You became like my mother. And you don't think about mothers, you don't have to. They just help them from the bottom of their hearts. Grandmother, tears ran up, gustily hugged her named daughter, and no longer argued, only prayed. Rachel was annoyed that because of her, the old wench young denies herself everything. But Rachel was adamant, even though she herself had a little more than a share of macaroni and tea with dried bread. She didn't complain. Jason wasn't discouraged. Of course, he knew what was going on. He tried to slip her money more than once, but Rachel just waved it away. And you're the same way, with all those handouts. I'm fine. I'll get by somehow. But Jason was persistent. One day he interrogated Rachel, and in the end he found out about her financial problems, her worries about Brendan, and her fear of the rich, abusive man. Rachel, he lamented, hugging her tightly. But why didn't you say so in the first place? I want to help. You can't carry everything on your shoulders alone. They sat in the kitchen that night, drinking tea and discussing the situation. Jason, as always, was a treasure trove of good advice and rational ideas. Okay, he said, stirring the sugar in his cup thoughtfully. Brendan has to be taken out, that's a fact. Otherwise the kid will get killed in the detention center. But how? There's no evidence against him. The only thing that's holding up hope for him is your bigwig statement. What do you mean? I don't get it. Rachel was staring straight ahead. If he fabricated the case against Brendan, he's the only one who can close it. We need to get in touch with him, probe him. Maybe we can appeal to his conscience or make a deal. Rachel hummed bitterly, her eyes downcast, hiding the unsolicited tears. But what conscience, Jason? He's got a stone for a heart. How can you get past that? But tonight, Jeremy Winston set himself up. He called Rachel on the video link. He smirked. It was a short, rather nasty conversation. Look, Camille, I may change my mind about taking a statement on your innocent Brendan, but not for nothing. You're gonna have to work for it. So here's the deal, you'll be my mistress. Your Brendan goes free. If he doesn't, he'll put you in jail. It's up to you. I'll give you 24 hours to think about it. And he's out. And Rachel's mind went foggy. It took a lot of effort not to yell, not to use a lot of profanity against the bastard. And she burst into tears. She sobbed bitterly, hopelessly against Jason. He was worried, stroking Rachel's head, whispering affectionately, and then he suddenly woke up and snapped his fingers. Rachel, let's blackmail him. You know, you're rich, man. Blackmail him with what? Are you out of your mind? Jason grinned. There was a sly twinkle in his eye. I have an idea. Rachel, he seems to like you, doesn't he? Well, maybe we should meet him, play a little prank on him. Something, you know, fatal. Rachel listened, feeling something bad stirring in her soul. Scary, embarrassing, but at the same time daring and exhilarating. It's a tempting idea. You mean? She began tentatively. And it was Jason who picked up on it eagerly. Go on a date with him, flirt a little, and set up a secret camera somewhere so he'd lick himself and say things he couldn't get away with. And he'll start hitting on you, of course. That's when you catch him red-handed. He was so engrossed that he jumped up and ran around the kitchen, waving his arms. Rachel looked at him and couldn't believe her eyes. What was this, her quiet, sensible Brendan suggesting she lie to a man for blackmail? It was surreal. But it was a good plan. Unconventional, risky. But it could have an effect. Jeremy Winston's not going to be able to get away with it. He'd have to take the application. Otherwise, you could ruin your career or go to jail for harassment. Okay, Rachel exhaled, feeling her heart racing. He had only one question: where was the camera? And with good resolution so he could see his face. Brendan smiled enigmatically, and the next day brought a flat rectangle about the size of a pack of cigarettes. Where's the state-of-the-art spy tech? I got it cheap from an IT guy I know. It's got enough battery life for 5 hours. Write down your ideas. So go for it, girlfriend. Vindictiveness was with her. Setting up the camera at the hotel had to be done in a terrible hurry. Rachel purposely showed up early to the reserved Sheraton luxury suite, 2 bedrooms, bed, fireplace, and other frills. She had hidden the camera in a decorative niche. It would have a great view of the entire room. Jeremy Winston showed up for his date slightly inebriated. He ordered a bottle of champagne and fruit and grinned carnivorously. And Rachel was circling him, making eyes at him. Only it turned everything upside down. The calculation was right. The rich man quickly floated from drinking and flirting. He started kissing, grabbing Rachel by all places, and she squealed. The guests giggled and poured sparkling wine. When Jeremy Winston became quite bold and began to voice his obscene desires aloud, Rachel gently but decisively freed herself from his clutches, depicted on her face extreme embarrassment. "Oh, excuse me, I have to go to the ladies' room," she said, and flew out of the room with an arrow. Only in the hallway did she catch her breath. I think it worked. The next day, the tape with the ambiguous footage was on the investigator's desk. He shook his head glumly at first, but the evidence was there. A drunken rich man is so and blazing with lust, grabbing the struggling girl and talking all sorts of obscenities. It's pure molestation, that's for sure. Brendan was released after a couple days for lack of evidence. Jeremy Winston, on the other hand, was taken to task by law enforcement. He, of course, threatened all the punishments of heaven. Even the lawyers they hired, they couldn't do anything about it. The videotape is authentic. So are the rich guy's fingerprints on the glasses. And even DNA from the cigarette butts in the ashtray. Rachel and Brendan followed the story from afar, following the news and the gossip of acquaintances and chuckling furtively, exchanging understanding glances. Wow, how did everything work out? Just unreal. Brendan smirked, pulling Rachel close to him. Deserve to be happy. Don't dig another man a hole, you'll fall in it yourself. Bite you, you creepy crawly bastard, she squinted blissfully, resting her cheek against his chest. She couldn't believe her happiness. Was it really over? Were there only cloudless days ahead in the arms of her lover? There was no doubt in her mind that Brendan was her destiny. They'd been through too much together. Their sudden love was too strong to withstand fear, pain, and dirty backstage games. And Deborah Smith seemed pleased with her future son-in-law. She saw that her daughter was in safe hands, that her chosen one would not hurt her, would not betray her. One evening, when Brendan was about to go home, the old woman suddenly rose resolutely from her chair and took him by the hand. "Son," she whispered, and her voice trembled with excitement. "I can see how much you love Rachel. Thank you for not leaving us in the lurch, for helping us with all your heart." She brushed away a stingy tear and smiled brightly, enlightened. "Be a good husband, okay? And I'll pray for you now day and night. Happiness to you, my dears." And she crossed the dazed Brendan 3 times. And Rachel looked at them from the side and almost cried with emotion. There it was, the real blessing of happiness, of a long, honest life. Now Rachel sees herself at liberty. And Deborah Smith seems to be well, and all is well at work. Without noticing it herself, Rachel has become accustomed during this tumultuous time to taking care of others. It seemed so easy and right for someone else. She was afraid to get attached. She thought she wouldn't open her heart to people after Killian. I thought maybe that was the point of life, to fly solo, where no one was needed. God, what a fool I was. Only now, having found a real family, Rachel realized here it is. Happiness is not in money, not in the career, but to love and be loved, to feel your need, indispensability for those who are near. "Beauty, what are you thinking about?" Playfully pushed her in the side Andrew. "Are you thinking of running away from me?" Rachel woke up from her thoughts, and with a smile pressed herself against her lover. She cupped his neck with her hands and kissed his nose. "Don't even think about getting rid of me." Andrew smiled happily, pulled her to him, and whispered in her ear, "I wasn't going to. You're my bird, my guiding star. You say, I love you. I can't stand it," he whispered, sending shivers down her spine. His heart beat in a frantic rhythm, each time as if it were the first time. Their lips came together in a long kiss. Outside the windows, the summer twilight was thickening. Crickets chirped in the grass, and the two lovers stood on the threshold of their common future and were not afraid of anything, for now they were one. In the next room, Deborah Smith was serenely slumbering in her sleep, peaceful. The sorrows were behind them, and only joy lay ahead. After all, the grown-up and quiet Paul had come home. Bitter experience taught him a lot, and patience, and responsibility for his actions. Now all his free time he devoted to caring for his mother, helped around the house, took her for walks, to church. Grandmother could not be pleased with such changes. Every now and then she furtively wiped away tears of emotion, looking at him. Where will her son go now from loving hearts and caring hands? He would live like a man, work, atone for past mistakes. And Jeremy Winston, by all rights and wrongs, tried to hush up the scandal with harassment through trusted persons, came to Rachel. They say, "Take the statement, refuse to testify, and you will be rewarded." She agreed and even went to the investigator, but kept the videotape just in. That day, like so many the day before, Jason went about his usual routine of sorting through the new arrivals at the dump. Most of what he found, of course, was useless trash, even for a hobo like him. Here's a picture. It would seem that there was nothing extraordinary about the item. All the more reason for Jason to make no use of it. It was just a professionally taken picture of some office building. Jason was about to throw the photo away, but for some reason he couldn't. He sat down on the ground and stared at the photo. A swanky building, a gorgeous lobby, big bright windows. I think he'd even seen the building, or maybe he'd even entered it. Once those very beautiful doors had opened welcomingly before him, a successful businessman, Jason Leonidovich, dressed in an elegant, expensive suit, who had just stepped out of the fragrant salon of his expensive car. Yes, it was exactly like that, and not so long ago if you think about it on the calendar. In fact, it was as if a whole era had passed. But how did it happen that Jason Leonidovich turned into a bum Jason? That was fate. He stood up, slipped the photograph into his pocket, and walked away from the dump. He didn't want to drink or eat, or look for any valuables he could sell at the nearest stall for a few coins. He wanted to get back to the way things were, though he realized that it would be very difficult, if not impossible, to do so, but still, maybe not always. After all, he was what he was now. And most importantly, he still had a good education, a head on his shoulders, and business acumen. Yeah, luck ran out. A friend who became a business partner did his best. And after 5 years in prison, he'd have to start from scratch. Jason blew the whistle. "Come on, Ziggy. What are you standing there for?" He called out to his only friend, a small black dog he'd found in the dump. Some kind soul had decided to get rid of the unwanted offspring, but she hadn't drowned the puppies, just threw them away. 2 died, but 1 was still showing signs of life. Help came in the form of Cole, who picked up the poor thing, took it out, and now he was glad that there was at least 1 living creature around, whose companionship was a joy. So, feeling almost like a Robinson in this world, Jason named the dog Ziggy. Whoever needed it would understand, but the rest of us wouldn't care. They walked with their friend to Jason's shack. "So, Ziggy, you want to stay here? I'm going into town. You don't want to be there. It's going to be a long walk. You'll be tired, but I'll bring you something good to eat. Okay?" The dog barked unhappily, but obediently settled down on the beds they shared. Jason set off on what was going to be a long journey. He decided to find the building for himself, not knowing why, just to stand around or something. To pretend he was a normal person for a little while. He even shaved and combed his hair more carefully than usual for such an occasion. I mean, he rarely did that at all, but now he was really getting ready to go out in public. And next to a building like this, it would be a shame to walk around as a ragamuffin. Though, of course, just combing his hair was not going to improve his appearance. After wandering around the city center for a while, he found the place. The time was already approaching evening. The working day was coming to an end. People were coming out of the doors, apparently employees, bosses, middle managers, ordinary clerks. All beautiful, dressed up, satisfied with themselves, and with their often unneeded order. During the day they were waiting for cozy apartments, maybe cafes and restaurants, delicious dinners, communication with the same successful, satisfied with life people. But Cole knew how easily all that prosperity could be ruined. After all, wasn't he the one who stood firm? And this is what he'd become. Of course, it doesn't happen to everyone, but it's not as rare as we'd like it to be. He strolled along the building without purpose. Most of the people were already gone. There were hardly any passers-by. This street was more frequented by cars. As he passed one of the windows, he stopped, attracted by the sounds of some argument or even scandal. The open window was higher than his head. He could not see the people arguing, and they could not see him. So he could listen to what was going on. He stopped just out of curiosity. In general, he didn't like scandals and tried to avoid them. Then, in his past life. But now the business conversation between businessmen, even if it was in a raised tone, intrigued him for some reason. He imagined how he would behave in such a situation. "Where are you taking me?" "Some kind of clean water." "I'll drown you, asshole." "You want clean, you want dirty," the boss's voice rumbled. Another, calmer voice answered, "You're going to get stuck in all this yourself. You can argue with me all you want, but right now the truth is on my side. The labor exchange is on your side now, and you better get the hell out of here." "Before you go to jail," threatened a voice that suddenly sounded familiar. "Of course I'll leave. I'm not staying. Just don't think that's the end of your troubles." "My troubles may not end, but yours will start in earnest. I'm warning you not to play with fire," the boss warned. And judging by his voice, his subordinate believed him. But he didn't want to give up so easily. "But we'll see about that." The interlocutor did not threaten, but just wanted to leave the last word for himself. "I don't see any reason for me to worry. It's you who should be worried in case of anything." They both rattled. "I don't have much to rattle for," the boss replied more calmly. There was a slamming sound, closing the doors. The subordinates must have left the office. Jason grinned. Who talks like that in full voice at an open window? The boss, he couldn't handle his subordinates, couldn't handle confidentiality. Anyone could have been at the window. However, it did not concern him at all, and he also walked along the wall of the building to the exit. The door opened, and a rather young, imposing man hurried out. You could tell by the red stain on his indignant face that he was the one arguing with his boss right now. Cole sighed, followed his nervous jog toward the parking lot and thought, "This is just the beginning, isn't it? You'd better be careful around people, especially bosses." He already knew what he was thinking, but he wasn't going to pry into such a man with stupid advice. But this stranger on the way to his car, without stopping, shoved some folder into the trash can, and that was it. He walked to the car, opened the door, got in and drove off. And Cole stayed, very interested. He wasn't used to going through trash, and now he didn't have to do it at all. The folder was on top, and the garbage can itself was clean. He took it out, weighed it on his hand. It looked like nothing special, and certainly nothing useful to him in these papers. But why not take it, flip through it a little, just to hold on to the business papers for old memory? And maybe something interesting could be found out. Shoving the folder under his arm, he went back to his shack, to his lair, having bought 2 hot dogs for himself and for his friend with the last money. In his shack, after a modest dinner, he pulled out his find and began to look through the papers. At first without much interest, just remembering things long forgotten. But with each passing minute, he became more and more convinced that he had picked up the folder for a reason. "It was not for nothing that I was near that building and witnessed the argument. Looks like fate has decided to take a turn for the worse. Listen, buddy," he turned to the dog. "This is our chance. Maybe we'll be normal people soon, maybe even rich. Well, you're not a man. You'll still be a dog, but still." The dog came and put his face on his master's lap. "Don't worry, I won't forget you. You'll always be with me." "I'm not the kind of guy who does that to his friends." Jason nodded at the folder and the signature on the last page. He knew those scribbles well enough. I guess he'd been wrong not to look in the window. Then he'd quickly recognized the man who'd caused his present predicament. Maybe he was right. Because before he'd looked at the papers, it had been useless to meet Oliver Jujinovich. But now that he knew a little more about him, it might do him some good. I wonder why that guy threw the file away, decided not to mess with Oliver, knowing his temper. Well, that's pretty smart. Jason, on the other hand, doesn't have much to fear. He's not going to fall any lower than he is. And these documents can play a pretty important role. First of all, it would allow him to get back at Oliver and to do exactly what he deserved. Jason's mind flashed back to 6 years ago. Yes, he'd been a respectable man, a prosperous businessman, husband to the beautiful Crystal, owner of a fancy house, and so much more. But he made an unforgivable mistake, trusted his then partner, whom he considered a close friend. And what a friend he turned out to be. He went behind Jason's back, started running his scams, and you set him up. Jason's responsibility was short-lived. Investigation, trial. Thanks to his lawyer. It was only 5 years, but it was enough to ruin Jason's life. His wife left him as soon as Cole was arrested, so she filed for divorce right after the trial. I never heard from her again. And I never saw her myself. No transfer to juvie, no visit, no nothing. I wrote a couple of times myself, but I quickly realized it was useless. There was no answer. His wife's betrayal was no less painful than Oliver's. And for several years in the penitentiary, he waited for her to come to her senses. Then he got angry, dreamed of revenge, and then he forgot. Once he was free, he didn't even remember Crystal, didn't try to meet her to throw any reproaches in her face. Why? People break up. And in a situation like this, it's best to forget about each other. Like everything else, it seemed useless to fight for his freedom, to try to prove innocence. He preferred to serve his time quietly, without getting involved in any conflicts. And so he did. And now he came to this very freedom, where no one was waiting for him, and no one was glad to see him return. There was no one. Jason's parents were long dead. His friends had mostly disowned him. Some believed in his guilt, and some maybe didn't, but chose not to get involved with the prisoner. There was nowhere to go and no one to go to. But you had to live somehow. And so the former, respected and loved by all, became an outcast, living on the dump or lying about unfulfilled dreams. And that hope, apparently, will soon come true. And all thanks to that photograph. Now it was necessary to think over the plan of his next actions, because it was easy to make a mistake, and there might not be a second chance. He studied the papers again, more thoughtfully, and went to the office. It was not worth it to hope that they would let him in easily. They didn't like ragamuffins, which Jason was. He peered through the window and saw his nemesis. Oliver looked as good as he had 5 years ago, even more solid. I'll get your ass out of here soon enough, Jason thought to himself, his former friend and now his worst enemy. So how would he get into the office? Try to get in through the window. Yeah, they'd call security, tie him up, send him away without even a word. No, that's not an option. Knock. Calling Alex and asking him to let him in isn't a good idea either. He'll probably order the guards to send him away. So the result would be the same either way. So Jason headed for the door, hoping to somehow get through on his own. A guard stood in his way, as expected. Where are you going? Get out of here. No service here, he said menacingly. And don't ask me. Here, look at this folder, where I've slipped some old papers in for good measure. I must give it to Alex Eugenovich. Let me give it to him. The guard held out his hand. No way. I'm told to hand it to him personally. Are you distributing documents here, the contents of which you are not supposed to know? He tried to give his voice a superior tone. So you're supposed to know, and I'm not. The guard took offense. All right, I'll call the owner. You don't need to call anyone. Jason stopped him. Let me through. I know where his office is. What the hell are you thinking? He knows me perfectly well. And you'll find out soon enough. On the other hand, I've been working undercover. Understand? He liked that line from some detective story. Plus it explained his shabby appearance. So let's get you out of here before it's too late. The guard, grumbling grudgingly, let him through, and Jason took a firm step toward the office. There he had to overcome the resistance of the pretty secretary, who turned out to be even more serious. Alex Eugenovich is busy. He asked not to be disturbed, the girl said, squeamishly glaring at Jason as she stood in his way. But you didn't argue with her. You went straight ahead, realizing that the beautiful girl would now retreat out of fear that the dirty tramp would touch her with laughter. Cole simply opened the door and stepped into the office. "I've asked so many times without this," the big boss began. But then he caught a glimpse of the entrant and faltered. "What, Alex, you didn't expect?" Jason asked, not batting an eye. "I see you're relieved. Good for you. So what's it to you, Cole?" "What's the matter? All this noise?" Alex asked nervously. "My old life I need," Jason calmly replied. "Life? I didn't take it away from you. You're alive and well, I see. But I hardly am. And you don't want to ask that, do you?" "I don't want to ask anything. I asked you what you want, didn't I?" "Answer, I'm in a hurry, or I'll call security to have you thrown out of here." Alex must have been scared at first minute, but quickly realized he had nothing to fear. The sight of Jason proved that he was at the bottom of his game, so it wouldn't be hard to deal with him. But Cole realized something too, both from the paperwork and the first few minutes of the meeting. Alex is vulnerable. He has weaknesses to play to. "Alex, I'm about to show you something. Have a seat." And he laid the folder out on the table. Two businessmen, former partners, leaned over it, and Jason, sliding a not-so-clean finger with a dirty fingernail chip, had no trouble explaining to another businessman what he could do using these documents. And mind you, this is just a copy. I have the original, and far more important. This, of course, was a bluff. He didn't have the original, but he had to do something to scare Alex. He turned visibly pale, clenched his fists, bit his lip. "Well, what do you want, Jason?" he asked again. "What do you want? What do you need? What do you want? What do you think I need? I need these documents to be made public and show everyone who you really are. Is that answer satisfactory to you? No, I think we can work something out. I understand you're in a tight spot right now. You need money." "And money? How much?" Cole said with a sneer. "I wonder if you want to give me for a bottle of vodka and a pie." "But why? I could do with more," mumbled Alex. "You'll have to give a lot more. My friend, I don't look very good, and my life is even worse. But I must disappoint you. I didn't become an alcoholic, and I didn't drink my brains away. So you can't tempt me with vodka. But I can make these papers go through with no problem. You realize that, don't you?" "I do. That's what I'm asking. How much money are we talking about?" "Both very large, Alan, and not just money. I also need an apartment and some help with the paperwork, but I need help with my job. You know what I mean? Failure to fulfill just one point leads to the inevitable publicity of everything I know, including your involvement in my case. You know exactly what that means for you." "Look, Cole, this is too much. You come out of nowhere screaming, 'Give me this, give me that, make it 5, 10, and you owe me.' I'm not saying that you should really give away everything I've lost by your grace. I know that's impossible. But I can make you realize how much it hurts to lose it. I didn't think you'd go as far as blackmail. I learned that in prison. All right, I'll concede that your demands are legitimate. Besides, we have some very important negotiations ahead of us, and we don't need any more publicity right now." "My reputation must be impeccable," Alex muttered to himself. "Okay, I agree to your terms, but remember you have to keep silent in any case, no matter how it turns out." I wonder what may or may not happen next. Jason wondered, who found the easy agreement suspicious. But there was nowhere to go. And while we're on the subject, let's make this quick, because I don't have time or place to wait. All the apartment in which I can put you is now available. It's empty. It will be registered to you," Alex said with despair. "There will be money as a lifting allowance, but not the largest sum will be enough for the first time. That's why I'll give you a job too. And then you earn your own money, you understand? The salary will be good, but you won't be able to pull anything more than that from me." I understand you. But I hope you understand everything I told you. I'm not that much ahead of you. I did miscalculate some things, though. Well, let's not dwell on the past. Let's get on with the future. He took a stack of papers out of the desk and threw them on the table. Now we're going to get an apartment. No. Listen, I'll give you the money. Edward, you need to clean yourself up first. I'm sorry, but I'm afraid to even let you in the car. You stink. What can I do? I've been living in a dump. I mean, I know this is what you wanted, but stars change, especially yours. And things went from there. After he got the money, Jason cleaned himself up as much as possible, bought some clothes, and the next time he walked into his enemy's office, looking almost as elegant as he had before he'd done time. All that was left was the paperwork for the apartment Alex was giving him to own. So that was all clear. What about the job? Jason asked. There will be a job for you, the boss said reassuringly. I know what you're capable of. We'll just get the paperwork done. And that's it. You're a perfectly normal, law-abiding citizen. No one will say a bad word to you about your criminal record. Don't say a word. You're going to be the head of our department. So act like it. Make up some kind of cover story. You can get married for good measure. Are you done with Christina? You don't know. I'm not interested in Christina at all. As for changes on the personal front, we'll see. Jason's new life had begun. He moved into a new, spacious and renovated apartment where he moved his dog. Jason went to work, but it was impossible to say that he was completely calm about his future. There were plenty of reasons to worry. Every day he was getting more and more into the affairs of the company of his former comrade. The latter realized that the firm of which he had become a part was involved in very dark matters, such as bribery and embezzlement. In addition, his own tenure in a prominent position was, strictly speaking, illegal. And all of Jason Leonidovich's associates were literally hanging by a thread, and he was even more vulnerable than anyone else, both as a man tried for economic crimes and as a blackmailer. Alex would not stay silent, but would try to make Jason responsible for everything again. This time, of course, he wasn't going to take the blame. He had the evidence, but he didn't want to go through the hassle. Yes, life had taught him. He wasn't the same gullible Cole anymore. Was he ready to trust in friendship and genuine affection? No, he knew where that could lead, and he could quit this job at any time. In the meantime, he'd stayed mostly to get to the bottom of the firm's illegal schemes and, if anything, to be the first to expose Alex without feeling any remorse. On the contrary, after all, he hadn't gotten revenge on him yet. It was not revenge to take what he had gotten from a man by taking from him immeasurably more. But his hatred for his former friend had to be restrained. He worked properly at his new position, but he was not particularly well liked in the team. They were wary of him. But what about the chief's protégé who appeared from nowhere? What is he here for? Alex Eugenovich does nothing for nothing, and they tried to communicate with him only on business, and even then, as rarely as possible. The only person who treated Jason kindly was the janitor Veronica. Maybe that young, beautiful girl liked him. Cole sometimes caught her look of sympathy and wondered, how did Veronica know about his difficult fate or just guessed? What was he supposed to sympathize with now? He's got a good job, he's got money. Everything seems fine. And even the attention of such a pretty girl is not deprived. But why does she only work as a cleaning lady? That's the question Jason asked, and that's how their conversation began. Don't think I'm stupid or anything else, she smiled. I have an education and a little work experience, but life circumstances don't allow me to enter the profession yet. I have a small child, and here the work schedule suits me. And there are no grandparents. I have no husband either. But I have a wonderful son. Her face lit up, as every young mother's face does when she talks about her favorite child. After that, they began to talk as friends. First, Jason had no one else to talk to, and second, he enjoyed talking to this really smart woman. But he was hesitant to move on to a closer relationship. He realized that he had an important and dangerous job to do, but he was always happy to talk. He even shared with her difficulties at work and his suspicions. And Veronica was in complete agreement with him. Yes, I see that everything is not clean here, but I deal only with the physical dirt. I'm not supposed to get into the rest of it, but I know more than I'm supposed to. Not just because I'm smart. Nobody takes me seriously around here. They discuss things in front of me, so I draw conclusions. And she was eager to share her discoveries about the dark deeds that Alex wouldn't see the woman, wouldn't tell her how dear she had become to him, would she come to visit him in the hospital. Sad experiences of the past had told him that women didn't really like to deal with those who were in trouble. And while Veronica was no Christina, who would blame her if she two-stepped aside as if she didn't have enough problems of her own to deal with. But even if she didn't, what could he offer her? Ready to die at any moment. And he was about to confess his feelings to her. What a fate. Just start with relief, as prepare the barn for a new nightmare. And then he thought of Alex. He'd be glad to hear about his former friend's illness. Cole had never gotten his revenge. It hadn't been so hard to do, though, just to report all the shenanigans. Gathered evidence, proof. Wanted to get the word out, so he waited for the right moment. And here it is. I guess all is not lost, though. I mean, nobody's saying he's going to die right now. He's got some time. He may well leave the hospital, return to work, declaring himself quite healthy, and strike a crushing blow. Except Veronica would still have to see him, confess and apologize for the fact that they can't be together. There's not enough time for him. The first to visit him, strangely enough, was Alex Yudinovich. Probably he learned about the serious situation of his friend and decided to cheer him up. And to probe the ground, of course. He was the least interested in Cole's recovery, and would probably be happy with a very different outcome. But he wasn't going to show it. On the contrary, he was trying hard to show how worried he was. Hey Cole, faking sick? I'm just going to skip work, you see. What a boss. Remember, all illness comes from nerves. So cheer up. I thought I'd come and see you, since you're all alone. Maybe I shouldn't have broken up with Kristenko. I think she's alone too. Tried to make something of herself, but it didn't work out. She was lousy, but at least she had some chatter. She's been out of my life for a long time, and I'm not interested in her at all. That's fine. Basically, yeah. Why do you need her? Okay, she did that to you. What about the baby? What baby? Jason wondered. What kid? Don't you know what's going on? Alex wondered. You were taken away, and she was pregnant. Then she gave birth to a boy, I think, and gave him up. It's understandable. You can't do much with a baby in your arms. Why are you so upset? I shouldn't have said that. Don't worry, you can't, I guess. I think it's all right. The boy was adopted. He's probably alive and well. He's doing well in the orphanage, too. I saw on some TV program what kind of orphanage he was in. How pale is he? Jason asked. Where did she give birth? How would I know? I've only seen a glimpse of her. Oh, she's a mean woman, what she says. I got a life to make. Cole's got his life all set up and nobody here will pour me a bowl. Can you believe that? That's what she said. And you're already making a move on our cleaning lady. If you can take Cole out of the dump, you can take the dump out of the person. But she's all right. You're a pretty girl, you're agile. So quit being sick, get well, get your life together and get back to work. Everyone's waiting for you. Alex, pleased with himself and the effect of his news, left. And Jason, not hearing his last words, was left in the worst state of mind. He has a son, and he is, it turns out, 6 years old. And he either lives in an orphanage or with strangers he thinks are his parents, and doesn't know about his father. This news was not easy to recover from. Yes, from the hospital must be urgently discharged to find his child. But what's the point? Even if she does, How much time will they have left together? And the baby will get another trauma from which we'll be able to recover. But he couldn't give up trying to find his son, even just to find out about his fate. But who could he ask for help in such an endeavor? The door opened and Veronica came in. "Jason, as soon as I found out, I came straight to you," she said excitedly. So his dream seemed to have come true. He could explain himself to Veronica, but just now he found out. This information completely filled his brain. It was not up to love, and he did not even feel much joy from this visit. It was a little easier, though. At least he had someone to share it with. "Hi, thanks for coming. It's really good to see you. You know, Veronica, I have a son," he said, and was ready to tell about his ex-wife's meanness. But Veronica interrupted him with some unexpected words. "I know, Cole, I told you about my gift, so as soon as I saw you, I realized you are the father of my Karyusha. I didn't know how to tell you. How do you say you thought I'm a charlatan? Yes, I adopted him when he was still a baby. But no one knows that my son is adopted. I didn't want to tell you because I'm ashamed to tell you that I'm infertile after a childhood illness. You don't believe me? I'll show you all the documents. I'm not a con artist. It says I adopted him, and Christina gave birth to him. And then you can take a DNA test." Jason leaned back on the pillow helplessly. God, was it really true? "Veronica, I believe you." "Of course I believe you. Without any paperwork, without any tests. And I'll probably find out just before I die. Is there no danger? Yes, but there's a very good chance of survival. I can see that you've recovered. Thank you again. I can see my son as soon as he's well. I don't want to take him to the hospital. He's been afraid of them since he was admitted for bronchitis when he was 3. Wouldn't you want to take him away from me?" Veronica asked anxiously. "Take him away. You know, I wanted to tell you something today. I love you," Jason took her hand, "and I want you to be with me and with our son. Yes, I don't know how long I'm going to live, but I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Do you understand?" Cole, Veronica whispered tearfully. Jason gave her the keys to his apartment and asked her and her son to live there until he returned, and to please watch Frankie. "He's my dog. He's probably suffering alone in there right now. Don't be afraid of him. He's kind. The food is in the lockers. It's better to walk him twice a day. He's very docile." Cole smiled, realizing how much he missed his companion. It would probably make him feel better to have his faithful friend's face resting on his shoulder again. The doctors insisted that Jason stay in the hospital because his condition was alarming, but he was adamant. "No, I have something very important to finish, more than one thing. Anyway, I'll finish it. I'll be back. I promise. I feel fine. I'll take the medicine as you write. You're in danger of never coming back. Well, or you'll be brought back with your legs. Pardon my bluntness," the attending physician said dryly. But how would a man who had been lonely for so many long years like to live happily with his beloved woman and son? He had no idea what happiness it was to hold his child in his arms, and he already saw how together they would go for walks, sit at the table or on the couch, watching cartoons. Yes, for this he was ready to be cured. Only now, having realized how much he didn't want to die. He'd lost a lot of time away from his son. Not seeing him as a baby, not seeing his first steps and first smile. But if it hadn't been for that time in prison, Kyle wouldn't be Veronica's son, but Christina's. And it might have been a long time before he would have known what the woman he thought was his beloved and loving wife was really like. And it would be foolish to think that she would never have revealed herself, would still have delivered a terrible stab in the back, choosing the moment. Illness would not have forgiven. Likewise would have walked away, abandoning the child. And most importantly, he would never have known Veronica. I wanted to live now more than ever. And of course, to take revenge on his enemy. Because now he had more information, more opportunities, and more reasons to take revenge. There was no forgiving that. So Jason insisted on being discharged, left the hospital, and rushed home, where his dearest people were waiting for him. And he wasn't the only one happy to be back, meeting his son, a truly wonderful, well-developed boy. Veronica's joy, the delight of the meeting all this, made him forget about the disease and not think about the possibility of imminent death. And even the fact that the next day he was waiting for a date with people among whom there were not those he wanted to see did not spoil his mood. When he left the hospital, his colleagues noticed that Jason Leonidovich looked much better, and his mood became more positive. They thought it was because he had been cured, but it wasn't really that. He was just happy. But his physical condition was far from the best, which he carefully hid from everyone, including Veronica. They, working together, continued to collect the dirt necessary to testify and send Alex Eugenovich to the place where he so easily sent other people, time after time avoiding deserved punishment. But now he would have no chance to avoid punishment. He had sinned too much. But the disease wasn't going to wait. Jason's condition was worsening, and when all the evidence, including the videos incriminating Alex Eugenovich, was in hand, Cole was again taken away by ambulance, now out of the house. The doctors were outraged. Now there was no way around the complicated surgery, and there was no guarantee it would work. And it didn't. The patient fell into a coma. But Veronica was not going to retreat and let the whole case, because of which her beloved was in such a serious condition. She decided to sue her boss herself. She even suspected that the boss was somehow guilty of her loved one's illness. They're capable of anything. Should he have slipped some kind of poison? Not only that, he's got a bad reputation. He could have done some kind of spoiling too. But don't get your hopes up. Cole's going to come to his senses. And he'd be glad to know that the case was moving forward. She was sure of it. Alex Eugenovich hadn't expected this outcome at all. He hadn't blamed Jason's illness, but he was glad that the man who'd been plotting against him was out of commission. Hopefully for good. How ungrateful they can be. I got him off the street, dressed him, gave him shoes and a job, and all he could think about was how to beat me up, he thought, forgetting who had put Jason on the street. And it turned out that even the illness of his former friend did not save him from punishment for everything he had done. And thanks to whom? The cleaning lady, whom Alex Eugenovich didn't even consider to be a human being, a completely insignificant creature who had gotten involved with this half-dead ex-convict and sued him. A prominent businessman against him who had never said a bad word to her. It's clear that Cole used her, but what's she gonna do now? She's out of her mind, stupid. If that bastard doesn't die, he'll be crippled. He'll sit on her neck, lose her job, and then she'll be left with nothing. She'll go begging with a child and a husband growing on her hands. And no one will give her a handout. He'd said all this to Veronica at the confrontation, but she'd reacted rather calmly. Jason's on the mend already. He'll be a witness against you at the trial, she said. I'm going to come out, do you hear me? He shouted, seeing his angry words failing to accomplish their purpose. The investigator made some notation in his notebook and called him to order. With your threats, you are only making your own situation worse, he said. Alex was ready to cry from helplessness. As for Veronica's words about Cole recovering, they weren't quite true. He had regained consciousness, but his condition was still a serious concern. He was not to be disturbed. Veronica visited him every day, but she couldn't stay with him for long. She was busy with the baby and testifying against Alex. And every time she visited, she noticed a young female doctor, Angela Adamson, next to her lover's bed. At first, it was reassuring. Cole would never be neglected and his condition would be constantly monitored. But then it got suspicious. Why on earth would this young woman be anywhere near Cole? But not to make a jealous scene in the hospital. Besides, it wasn't just jealousy that was bothering her, but maybe it was worth paying closer attention to their interactions. As Jason came to his senses, Angela, who was helping him, asked, "Aren't you Jason Leonidovich, the businessman who disappeared without a trace a few years ago?" "Yes, but not without a trace. I went to jail, spent 5 years in prison. Not that Cole was all that in the mood for conversation. But still, talking to someone was easier than just lying there staring at the ceiling." "Yes, your life is strange, businessman," the woman said in an unusual tone. "And no sooner did you get out than you got sick." "Yes, as you see. But I think I feel better now, thanks to your efforts." "Yes, men like you neither burn in fire nor drown in water, don't you think? However, medically it's not all smooth sailing. But that's fixable. Did you have a wife?" "Christina, if I'm not mistaken." There was a hint of irony in Angela's voice. "I did. As soon as I went to trial, it came up," Jason answered, still not sure where the doctor was going with this. "So you wanted her to wait 5 years and stare out the window, not make her steal and rob other people. I know Christina. She doesn't abandon loved ones in times of need. You left her pregnant. And all you're worried about, I take it, is your promising career falling apart. And she, poor thing, was so upset that she lost the baby. She's been depressed ever since. But I know you don't care. You've got another woman running to you. Does she even know what kind of person you are?" "She knows everything. But Angela Adamson, I'm guessing you don't know what's going on with your friend. So you only believe what she tells you?" "Don't tell me she dumped me. That's bullshit. I'm over it, and I'm over it. But the fact that she left our son at the hospital and walked out of their light, how do you think that feels?" Jason couldn't contain his feelings any longer. "Left how?" "She said the boy was stillborn," Angela said, confused. "She's dead herself, but her soul died a long time ago. My son is alive, but now he has another mom, the same one who visits me. But please don't tell my ex-wife or your friend. My son and I have nothing to do with her anymore." "You can't believe Christina would do that." "I don't believe it. She was so worried." "I don't know what she was worried about or what it was about, but everything I'm telling you is true. I didn't know she was pregnant, and I didn't know she was keeping the baby. She never even wrote me a letter. So go protect her, be her friend. But don't turn your back on her, and don't publicize it. Or they'll think you're the same." Angela left without saying anything. It was obvious that she was shocked by the news about her friend, but she wasn't going to take anyone's word for it. She soon learned through her own channels that Jason hadn't lied about the baby and that Christine had simply given up on the newborn. She learned that the baby had been adopted by a childless woman. Shocked, she called her friend and told her she knew everything and didn't want to talk to her anymore. She didn't tell Jason about her son. He didn't ask. And the fact that her friend, if not dear, then sometimes useful, now didn't want to talk to her didn't upset her too much. "Probably in my life began a white streak. I do not need friends," she said mockingly. "Not everyone is as pure as you, Ellie. I have enough friends and girlfriends without you. And you, Madam Doctor, you can go ahead and give enemas to your patients. Fortunately, I'm healthy." "Yes, physically," Angela replied, hanging up the phone and blocking her ex-girlfriend. The next day, the doctor apologized to Jason for her outburst and said she wouldn't blame him for anything from now on. Christina, no doubt, is herself to blame for leaving her husband in distress, but that's understandable. But the abandonment of his own child, a terrible sin that does not deserve forgiveness. No woman would understand such a wild act. All the more Christine is not poor and could well raise a child alone. But come on, my Kyle with a new real mom is even better than it was before. As long as she doesn't have any more babies, I don't think she will. She seems to have other plans. Let's get her better. That was the beginning of the communication, which for some reason alarmed Veronica. Meanwhile, the investigation was looking into Alex's case. The investigator also came to Jason at the hospital, informing him that after the trial he would be able to claim solid compensation as a party who had suffered from the defendant's actions. Veronica knew about it too, so it wasn't just female jealousy that bothered her about Jason's interactions with the doctor. She feared for Cole, knowing that Angela knew his ex-wife. She feared that the two devious women were still communicating and together, perhaps plotting something nefarious. It's not for money or profit these two girlfriends are getting close. Why, the moment is most favorable for them. He's sick. He's practically at Angela's mercy. And who knows what she might come up with. Give him some kind of will-depriving drug, and he'll sign anything without realizing it. No, we don't need that money. I'm afraid Cole can't take another shock. We have to get him out of this hospital by any means necessary. Just then, she heard about a young doctor who used unconventional methods in his practice and was very good at treating ailments like the ones Jason was suffering from. He was very active. She had secured an appointment with this doctor and his agreement to take a new patient for treatment. She'd been in such a hurry, in such an effort, that she hadn't listened to her intuition, which she'd always trusted. And although the doctors at the old clinic were strongly opposed to the transfer of such a heavy patient, she achieved her goal. Both she and Jason, who seemed to be on the mend, but too slowly. And here he was examined by a young doctor, Ben Janovich, who gathered a whole concilium of doctors who generally approved the previous treatment. They just prescribed a few other drugs. The attending physician was Ben Janovich, who reassured Veronica that the patient would soon be completely healthy. Only, I won't be able to take care of him too often and for too long. I have a small child at home, she worried. Maybe one of your workers could be hired, but for a fee. Of course, we have a very good nurse. She's an experienced nurse, too. Many patients credit their recovery 50% to her, I believe. I'll introduce you now. He looked out into the hallway, asking someone, "Where's Emily? Could you get her, please?" Soon a quick, smiling, middle-aged woman entered the office. "Don't worry, I'll have your patient like Christos behind my back. I take care of the sick like infants. He can't pee in time. I won't rest until I see you walking out of the hospital on my arm." "And good riddance," Emily said. Pretty nurse's face. And so it was. With kindness, she spoke convincingly, sincerely. And Veronica did not even doubt that she was leaving her beloved in safe hands. She was ready to pay for decent care. "Oh, it's a bit much. I'll take for less money. Yours isn't that heavy," Emily said when she heard the price Veronica was willing to pay. Jason really wasn't in the worst condition. And Veronica was almost relieved, certain that they would be walking out of the hospital on his arm soon. But not only was his condition not improving, it appeared to be getting worse. To her questions, Ben Janovich answered confidently. "What do you want?" At first, it's always like this. It means that the body is fighting, including all the resources. That's why it's harder. It won't last long. Hopefully soon it will be easier. And Veronica was not only perceptive, but also attentive and observant. Maybe that was her main gift. Thanks to these qualities, she began to notice some oddities, and the truth was revealed to her more and more clearly. Veronica noticed that Ben Janovich had a rather strange relationship with Emily, and not only in the office. They'd often smothered a coworker, especially at a time when she'd already left Jason. A few words she'd heard made it clear that the obliging caregiver wasn't as easy as she wanted to make it seem. Veronica decided to eavesdrop on the conversations between the genial doctor and the affectionate nurse. "Soon, my dear," soon said Ben Janovich, apparently answering some question from Emily. "I'm in a hurry myself. What can't you see? I'm in a rush, but we're not going to get anything without results." "You're right, we should be in a hurry. I'm afraid of unnecessary suspicion, which will cause his imminent death," answered Emily. "I don't care about suspicion. They won't prove anything. I wish it were sooner." "As if I didn't have an edge," replied the woman unhappily. "Not to mention that I'm fed up with this fool. It's not easy to take care of him too. And I have to approach others. How many pots do I have to carry? But bear with me a little longer. Once you've taken it on, they'll increase the amount, so don't talk so much. It's hanging by a thread. One word too much and I'm in jail, not money to talk. I'll never let a word out of my mouth. You think I don't realize this is serious? It's not the first time, okay? Here you go, and gently too. Please. Instead of those pills with the red stripes on them, put these instead. You got it. And replace the IV drip so that he doesn't suspect anything, not his girlfriend or the nurse. Save yourself." Such a snake. A chill went down Veronica's spine. They're killing Jason, and they're in a hurry to do it. But why? What do they have against him? What kind of money, and from whom do they hope to get it? Could it really be Alex Eugenovich, determined to eliminate Cole for good out of revenge? She leaned against the wall, closed her eyes, and the unfamiliar metallic voice rang clearly in her ears. "Ben, I'm not interested in your problems. A card debt is a debt of honor. You must pay it back now." "Is it soon?" Ben Janovic begged. "I'm doing the best I can." "Then do more than you can. No one will wait, but soon Christina will inherit the inheritance and I'll give it all back. None of this business of yours concerns me. How you get it and what you get doesn't matter. Just make sure you pay your debt as soon as possible. How long can we wait?" Yes, Ma, I am. Don't worry." And that was the end of the horrible visions. But it was clear to Veronica. So that's it. She thought painfully. He's a gambler. So he has to eliminate Jason somehow, so that his ex-wife can get the inheritance and pay off Ben Janovic for his terrible deeds. And I'm the one who sent their clinic into that wolf's den. Well then, I'll have to save him myself. But how do I do that? She can't sit next to the man she loves. She's got a son and a dog waiting at home, and she doesn't know much about medicine. Transfer Cole back to his old hospital. But won't her constant demands be seen as some kind of bizarre whim? I mean, her vision isn't proof, and she has no other evidence. And judging by the doctor's coordination, the nurse won't blab. They're careful and experienced. No, I can't do this on my own. Realizing this, Veronica decided to turn to a private detective. He should know how to deal with this situation and find a good specialist. She explained to him without any secrecy what was going on and what made her suspicious. I understand. You can just laugh at my visions. What I overheard doesn't mean much either. Yeah, well, maybe I really am crazy, but the fact remains that Jason was on the verge of recovery. Now he's dying. The other doctors can't keep a constant eye on him. There are a lot of patients in the hospital, Veronica said, breaking her arms. But the private detective took her story quite seriously. It doesn't matter whether I believe your gift or not. The important thing is that there is a problem, and it must be solved. I'm on it. Together, he and Veronica gathered evidence and easily proved the complex scheme Christina had devised. Cole's death was to the advantage of the whole company. His wife, albeit ex-wife, would become the sole owner and receive the money. But how to eliminate her ex-husband? She didn't want to meet him. And even if she did, how would she kill him? Christina couldn't do that. She didn't see herself as strong or capable. She turned to Arthur, her brother, a man well acquainted with the criminal environment and had some connections. With his help, she came across this Dr. Ben Janovic, who was in dire need of money. He, as it turned out, was an avid gambler and mired in debt. After listening to the conspirators, he agreed without further ado, but asked for a fee for his work. You understand, I can't do it alone. I will have to hire a man who, you understand, will not work for nothing and keep his mouth shut. Think about what kind of work you're signing me up for, so that everything will be without deceit. Give me a receipt that you borrowed this money from me." Of course, it was not without arguments, but there was nowhere to go. The receipt was written. The contract was made verbally. Emily's experienced caregivers could use the money too, so she agreed, colluding with Ben Jonovic, also for a considerable sum. And the medical staff began to act together, switched the drugs prescribed to Jason, and from day to day waited for his death. However, the young body stubbornly resisted thanks to honest doctors and nurses. Ben Jonovic and Emily's actions were exposed. They were detained, and none of them began to hide the customers. The whole company was put on trial, receiving prison sentences for attempted murder instead of money. Jason, having gotten rid of Ben Jonovic's treatment, recovered quickly. Now Veronica was afraid to leave him even for a minute, trying to be near him at all times, entrusting Kyle to a nanny. It was becoming increasingly clear to Jason that this woman was his salvation and happiness. Plus, she had become a mother to his son. He already knew Kyle, but they hadn't had a chance to talk for a long time. Cole was aware that he still had to learn how to be a real father. However, the boy was happy that now he had not only a mom, but a dad as well. So it shouldn't have been much of a problem. And after what he had been through over the past few years, the task didn't seem too difficult. Soon Jason made a full recovery and was released from the hospital. Not only recovered physically, and his family's financial situation was much better. Even the fact that they were both out of work wasn't something to worry about. It wasn't because they decided not to work, living off the compensation they'd received for the damage Alex had caused. Jason had decided to start his own firm. "We can afford it now. I won't be a salaried employee anymore, I'll be the owner, but I won't take you on as a cleaner either. Don't get your hopes up. You know, it's not like I was born a janitor. I'm actually a designer by training. Maybe you could use me in that capacity." Veronica rejoiced at his success. "You will. But you know, Veronica, the very first thing I would like to do is to arrange our wedding. And I'll finally adopt my own son. And we'll be a real family." "And I think we've been one for a while now," she replied, kissing her lover. And Buddy, as if to confirm these words, was twirling his tail as if it were a propeller.